Oh, good morning, everybody. Dear guests, thank you for everybody who's coming. I'm very happy that we have come together today in order to discuss a very dividing topic of wind power. Today, wind power is the visible symbol of modern climate policy. Wind power stands for the utopia that nature can provide clean energy in unlimited quantities without wasting resources. But nobody wants it in the backyard, and now we have it in the backyard. So today we are gathered here in the European Parliament, Europeans from Sweden, Netherlands, France, Germany, United, to share facts. It has been months of planning to assemble this conference, and I'm grateful that my co-host, MEP Roos, came on board with a unique experience and competence. Thank you, Rob. I'm also grateful that former Minister of National Education in Poland, MEP Anna Zalewska, will chair the panel that starts at 10 o'clock. It is an honor that she dedicated her time, especially since Poland is holding national election on Sunday. With these words, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Roos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. And very welcome, everyone. I think it's good that we are together, share our views on the wind industry. I call it on purpose that way because that's what it is. It is an industry instead of an energy production. I think it's very good that we have we shine a light on the production, on the environmental elements, and yeah, at what cost? Because it's not only the price, but it's also the environment. And here in this parliament, we are always busy with biodiversity, the environment. But when it comes to wind energy, it seems that everything is possible. No one looks at it. And we raised many times the questions about the cost of wind energy. And well, the problem is that they really, the thing is they are not interested in all the facts. So it's good that we show some facts over here. It's recorded, we can share it. And we have a panel, 3 persons, and the first person is Dr. Per Hansen. Dr. Per Hansen is an experienced guide in forest and fields and has a master's degree in land and environmental law. He is also an associate professor in applied forest ecology, a researcher and teacher. He teaches conservation, forest management, and boreal ecology. He's very knowledgeable and experienced in ornithologist. Do I say that right? Yeah, for me it was a new word, but it's a bird ecologist. I also still learn a lot, and has over the years acquired a great knowledge of species. For more than 40 years, Per has been an ambassador for birds. He will talk about the environmental impact of the wind industry, especially on birds. And I want to give you the floor. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Johan, Nissinen, and I will thank also Anna Zalewska for giving me the opportunity to come here. Actually, it's the first time that tax money, public finance, is inviting me to tell stories about what really happens. So I have a message that is maybe not so popular in at least in Swedish societies. As Robert said, I'm a mixture of forestry, ornithology, and environmental law. So I'm an odd person in that way. I have been dealing with this type of environmental impact assessments in over 30 years. So I've been a specialist in reading in between the lines. What is not written? That is almost always the most important. I have noticed also that the wind power industry, I agree with Robert, that's really the right word. It's has so much financial support and so much economy that they are really mighty and strong establishment. I'm sorry for I speak Swinglish, so I think you understand anyway. So to take the most important first, I would say if you think of me, you should think that I think wind energy, that in that matter the wind is green, everything else around the wind industry is not green. So there is so much problem around this. It's very area intensive. You need so much area. You destroy so much environment that former has been free for the birds, free for the bats, and for the insects to use. So, okay, next slide. Just a short presentation. My starting with a voluntary ornithology is really this crane color marking. We have an interesting project all around Europe, Northern Europe, Sweden, Norway, Finland, to put colorings on the legs on the cranes to understand where they migrate. So we have a recent publication, the map to the left, you can see where the Nordic trains are migrating. And as you can see, most of them are passing right over here on their way down to the winters in Spain along the oaks, korkekar in Swedish, I don't know that in English. So that was maybe the first, the start of my thinking of the greater picture of the migration routes. So that is, the cranes started that. The next, please. After I decided to start an own company, and as a free researcher, I got funding from this foundation, Marie Claire Kronstedt Stiftelse, to make a bigger research about bird migration. And I started to compile where the red list, the most threatened, the birds that are sensitive for wind power and that are using the thermal winds to migrate, the big birds, so to say. So that is the project. And next, please. It has been a fantastic data set, over 200, about almost 300,000 reports from up to 50 years from voluntary ornithologists or bird watchers. And together they have counted over 13 million migrating raptors. The maps are here to the left is show the most to the left is showing where all the blue dots are where the birds are coming in the spring from southwest or southeast, and the right panel is a special species called rough-legged buzzard. It's wintering mostly actually in Poland. It's migrating to southwest. So it's especially interesting for Polish and also actually down to Ukraine. So it's a southeast migration bird. It is, when it comes back, you can see the blue dots are concentrated in northern Sweden, in the Bottnian Bay, and I live right in that spot. So I always think of this big pattern when I'm home at my house. So that is the very interesting pattern. You can take the next, please. So just to be very short, to the left you can see what do you see? The lungs, the tracheids, and the respiratory system. To the right you can see top right the land birds migrating routes roughly, and to the bottom right you can see the waterfall migrating roughly. So the land birds of course avoid water. The water birds, the opposite, they search for the water. So you have to, when you plan the wind power, you have to imply all this knowledge, and I mean that is not done enough. It's a lot of protection areas, more to be decided, and Sweden has actually been told by the Commission, EU Commission, to make more Natura 2000 networks area in the Baltic Sea, and I agree fully. So I think it got too quickly when Sweden came into the EU, and now we have to repair that. More areas has to be protected, and I suggest that those flyways where thermal bottleneck sites should be the first one to protect. So next, please. As you can see, and as you know, it's a real problem. The rotor blades are really mortal for big birds. That is not, you can't tell that enough much times. So you can take next. And even if the bird, in this case the eagle you just saw, is hit by the rotor blade, it maybe not die directly, but it can be thrown away and land several hundred meters and walk slowly and hide in a bush and die. So, and besides that, even they are walking long distance from the collision place, they then are eaten by foxes, other predators, a lot of carnivores are taking the prey, and that also the case for small birds and bats. And concerning insects, you all know that the rotor blade has to be cleaned regularly because they are smacked with insects. And you have all heard that we have a crash in insects population. So why is the environmental association so silent about this? I can't understand it. Really, I'm worried. Why do the green associations keep so silent about this? So, okay, next. So, the authorities, what did they say when I present those 10 different hotspots, bottleneck sites? Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hansson. We appreciate your research. And then nothing. Nobody has invited me to tell more. Not the Swedish Agency of Protection, not the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, not even BirdLife Sweden, not the Swedish SNF, the Swedish biggest environmental association. They have not invited me. So this is the first time that tax money is used for giving me a possibility to tell you this. So I'm very, very grateful, very grateful. So none of those 10 hotspots are protected, but I think we should do it as soon as possible. And we should calm down, not take this wind power. I'm not against wind power, but it should be, it couldn't go so, now it's too hard pressure. It's so big, so quick. There is so easy to make the wrong decision. So we have to calm down, some kind of temporary stop in the construction, I suggest. And then we should compile all those knowledge and take care of it carefully. Okay, I don't know the time now. It's how much time I do have? You know, let's take the next.
Yeah, try to maybe.
I'm close to the end.
Sure.
Yeah. I have much to tell you, but I make a funny chat with the OpenAI ChatGPT and asked what word do you know about hiding the truth inside other words? So the ChatGPT suggests a half truth is a whole lie, and that is interesting. So as I said in the beginning, most of the AI environmental impact assessments are full of half lies, half truth, or lies. So I think that is the last. Take next. No, of course, the eagle has landed. The eagle tell you, we don't want you to panic, we want you to think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. Very interesting, and it confirms that what we all thought today are not really interested in facts. It's time that they ask you for what's really going on, and that we show the world that it's very necessary. Before we go on, I'd like to thank, because we forgot during the introduction to thank the interpreters. It's very important that we have a translation in Polish, in English, in French, and in Dutch. So these people make it possible that that this will be not a Babylonian confusion, and that we all can understand each other. Thank you so much for that, and also for the technicians who make it possible that we have all these presentations and online broadcast. For now, we have the next speaker, but for me it's unclear. Because we changed the order, is Mr. Shroom online? Ah, that's great. Great. Then we're going to the next speaker. The next speaker is Professor Dr. Karina Shroom. She's the director of the Institute of Coastal Systems, Herion Institute and University in Hamburg. Let me see, I have some more information. Professor Shroom has a broad interdisciplinary expertise in coastal research. She has studied dynamics of variable coastal systems using coupled modeling together with a broad range of observations as a primary research tool. She studies dynamics and decadal and to multi-decadal variability of shell systems. A significant part of Professor Shroom's research efforts went into development of coupled models. Current focus on her research is the impact of multiple drivers on matter transport, marine ecosystems and organisms, and the predictability potential for marine resources. Professor Shroom guided the compilation of a number of modeling databases and observational-based gridded products, which have now found their way in a wider reach research community. Professor Shroom, very welcome. You are online. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm speaking to you now from Germany, using energy, which we all need to sustain our normal life. And of course, I'm not against energy production, not against renewable energy production. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I know, what we know, and what we not know about how offshore renewable wind energy production changes the environment. And I will strongly rely on research we did for the North Sea. Next slide, please. When we look into the offshore energy production in the North Sea, we do see now, this is not anymore animated as I did it for you, but we see an area which is already a hotspot in the North Sea. And we are expecting further development. These are outlined by political declarations, starting out with the Esbjerg Declaration, which was the joint declaration by Germany, Belgium, Denmark and Netherlands to increase the energy productions in their exclusive economic zones in the eastern North Sea, up to 150 gigawatts by 2050 around about, and would also like to produce offshore hydrogen. And then, of course, the Ostende Declaration came, and this is now the entire North Sea states involved there, and they made up a big plan for the North Sea to increase from today around about 30 gigawatt to 180 gigawatt in 2030, which is soon, and to more than 300 gigawatts, 300 and more gigawatts by 2050. How that looks like, you can see on the figure here with the colored spaces areas here. You see offshore wind which is already installed, producing already, but also those ones which are built and planned in blue, and you also see the areas which are sort of considered for the coming plans here. And when you look at that, you see that the North Sea is really largely affected by these plans. And we see that there is also some interference with marine protected areas, which are the green and lilac areas here identified, which are nature conservation protection spaces. And we see that the mega use here raise a competition for space, so space but also energy are limited resources in the North Sea and probably also elsewhere. And also there's this interference in terms of space, and it also limits space for fisheries. Next slide, please. But this is not the only part of the story I'd like to tell you. Also, the energy extraction itself changes the environment. It's not just a border for animals there or a disturbance, but it's also changing the environment. And you see that from a picture extracted from remote sensing. You see the area here. This is the German Bight, and it's a beautiful area, also seen from space. If you zoom in here, which is done here in the red square, you see a nice illustration how the offshore wind farms, which are the small, or the windmills are the small red dots, how they change the environment. First of all, you see the wind coming from below the picture here in red, and it creates large-scale offshore wind wakes, a structure in the atmosphere. And then also the currents which meet the tides, they create wakes in the water, which are also turning around because of the tidal currents which are turning, and these are the structures you see here a little bit more pronounced and shorter, and they're driven by the current direction meeting the piles, and the current direction is indicated here in green. Next slide, please. So the energy, that is what we know, what we see already, that the energy extraction is changing the environment. It's not just immediately replaced, but it has a sort of spatial dimension before energy from upper levels in the atmosphere is replaced again. And we know when we look into that in a more spatial connection and look into that using the models to look into the future, how will the future a production pattern change the environment, we see that we find a decrease of wind. Roundabout in larger scales, 10%, locally even up to 20%, and we see that we will expect decreasing wind, and of course also a change in the potential for future wind farms, and this decrease in wind will also trigger changes in current structures, and these are large scale. So they are influenced not only within the area, not only the small pile structures, but they also mix the ocean, and they are propagating in the environment. And these changes will by itself trigger changes in food web structure and ecosystems, which we also have looked for a certain scenario, which is approximately the 2030 scenario. And you see here in colors the lower figure indicating that there are changes, and these changes in primary production, which is the base of all of the entire food web, is in the order of 10%. Next slide, please. So that is what we know, but what we don't know is actually what the consequences are for commercial fish stocks and for protected species, for protected areas, and how nature protection, fisheries, and energy production can be combined. We have just very little knowledge about that, and we neither know what are the limits of the energy production. So we have these big plans, but we have not the research made up for these plans that we really can assess that. Yeah, next slide, please. On the final slide, I have used some literature here, which you also can look up later, but all what I said here is published research and verified also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Schrum. Very interesting and very, I think it underlines what the European Court of Auditors also came up 2 weeks ago in a special report. They said that offshore energy in the European Union, that the ambitions are very high and that they have no idea what the risks are. And I think this underlines what's going on. And it's good that we have also this information and attention for the risk on the basis of your presentation. Thank you so much. I have a question, but we do that in the end. We go to the next speaker, and the next speaker is someone I know for quite a while because we work together. It's former professor, Dr. Lucas Bergkamp. He has a very special CV. Dr. Lucas Bergkamp is a medical doctor and also a lawyer in Brussels. He focuses on European law and in its relationship with international and national law, particularly in the field of risk regulation. He is the co-writer of a report on the spatial requirements of wind and nuclear energy and their prospective costs. This is the report, and it's peer-reviewed by Professor Nordhaus, climate econom, and this peer-reviewed publication for ECR Group and Renew Europe. This is extremely interesting and dense study, and we have asked him to focus on the spatial requirements of the wind industry. Professor Bergkamp, it's good to have you here again. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's a great initiative to look at the wind industry, which indeed has really taken off quite significantly, and as was indicated by previous speakers, we do not yet fully understand all the consequences of this new development, in particular not the adverse consequences, which traditionally have always been a great focus of the European Union in particular, since in the treaty we do have enshrined the so-called precautionary principle. But apparently precaution doesn't apply when the wind industry is involved, and also apparently the European Union feels it's appropriate to forgo environmental impact assessment in relation to many of these large-scale projects, because it's sort of good for the climate is the idea. Well, that's of course the critical question that we are addressing today. How, is it good for the climate is one thing, but secondly, you always have to consider what the adverse implications are of wind power, and those have not yet been addressed. Among those adverse implications is the space required by wind power. And that's the issue I will be talking about now in some more detail. Next slide, please. So the key concept here is energy density, which is a concept that really provides information about the amount of energy that's stored in a given system or in a given material. And that energy then can be extracted from the system or the material and then be converted into energy that's useful to human beings. In the case of power production, we of course are talking about generating electricity. Now, low energy density means that you need more space to produce the same amount of energy. The problem with wind energy is that it has low density, even lower than solar, for instance. And of course, if you compare to nuclear, as we'll do in a moment, then you'll see how big the difference really is. It's not 10 times, but it's more hundreds of times more energy dense nuclear, that is, and thus wind energy is in that regard quite inefficient. What we do see now is that as competition for space for land becomes more vigorous and land and space becomes scarcer, the public opposition to wind power is increasing, and in response to that, wind projects are moved offshore, and that's the development of the offshore wind industry. But also at the same time, we do now notice that the nuclear power option is receiving more attention from policymakers. It actually does have some traction now, some real traction, while previously it was not even considered at all. So in 2021, we did a study for the ECR group. It was led by Roos, who actually sponsored this study through the ECR group, and the Renew group was also involved. There was a member of parliament that stood behind it. Several Czech members of parliament actually sponsored this study. So this study focused, among other things, on the question around spatial requirements for wind energy, wind and solar, that is. So the basic question we had to answer was how much land/space is required if wind and solar energy is used to provide all electricity by the year 2050 in the Netherlands and the Czech Republic. And of course, these types of questions are a little bit specific to the country you're talking about, because the technical possibilities for wind power differ quite significantly among various geographies. Next slide, please. So we developed a model that looks at the reliable estimates for total energy demand in the year 2050, and we projected that into the future, and then came up with a specific energy demand for each of the two countries that we used to compute how much wind power was required and how much space, therefore, how much land would be needed to allow those wind turbines to operate. We did assume that the current state of technologies would be the same in 2050, and we also looked only at proven capacities, not at pie-in-the-sky promises made by the producers of wind turbines. So we based ourselves on what we know is possible now, and we based ourselves on what we know the capacity really is. We did look at plausible future innovations to some extent, but it was addressed more in a qualitative fashion in some of the comments. We did distinguish between wind at sea, wind on land, and wind on surface waters, because they each have their own specific requirements. And obviously they also differ in terms of the amount of land versus the amount of water they would occupy. And then we computed the maximum amount of surface of the land and space that would be available for wind and solar power, given the current regulatory and technical restrictions. You cannot place wind turbines everywhere, that's quite clear. For instance, here in the city of Brussels, you couldn't start building wind turbines. So we basically looked at what land would, in theory, be available to construct wind farms. Next slide, please. So findings for the Netherlands, we found that the space required to provide the energy demand in 2050, which is 3,000 petajoule, if you were to do that only by using wind and solar power, the space required would range from somewhere between 24,000 to 68,000 square kilometers. And to put it in perspective, 68,000 square kilometers corresponds to 1.8 times the entire territory of the Netherlands. In other words, the Netherlands, only to provide the power for its own people, would have to go outside its own territory to do that, which means it would have to go out on the North Sea, further out, or something like that, or start importing power, of course, which other nations would also have to do if they follow the same route. So that would definitely cause issues. Now, if you then compare to how much space, how much land you would need to produce the same amount of energy by nuclear power, you would see that you only need 120 square kilometers. So the difference there is quite huge. It's at least 260 times more if you are talking about offshore wind, and then we're talking only about the offshore wind close to the coast, not far out. Or you would need up to 534 times more land than nuclear to generate the same amount of energy. Next slide, please. The findings for the Czech Republic were as follows. The total energy demand required in 2050 was 1800 petajoule. If you then use wind and solar to provide for that amount of energy, you would need between 14 and 43,000 square kilometers, which would cover between 18 and 55% of the Czech Republic's available land. So you can see that also in the Czech Republic is a huge amount of land that would be needed to provide for the space that is required by the wind industry if they are the ones that provide the entire energy supply. If you then compare to how much you would need to produce the same amount of energy using nuclear energy, you would conclude that you only need 269 square kilometers. So wind energy requires at least 54 times more land, but it could be even up to 160 times more land. Next slide, please. Now, in the study, we have treated the wind industry quite favorably. We have not done anything to sort of manipulate the data in favor of nuclear. We have in fact done quite the opposite. And there are a number of reasons why, in reality, the space requirements imposed by the wind industry will be even more demanding. For instance, what we did not include is the land that is required for the mining of and the production of the materials, the resources you need to produce the wind turbines, to install them and so forth. And those are quite significant. They're not included in these estimates. So we left all the downstream industry, we left it outside of the scope of this study. And of course, if you compare that to uranium mining or mining of other materials that can be used in the nuclear industry, you will see that there is quite a significant difference. It's much, much less than you would need in terms of mining and production when compared to wind. We also didn't look at the land needed for disposal of the waste. We all know that wind turbines have a limited lifespan, much shorter than the nuclear plants. Nuclear plants can go on 60, 70, 80 years and beyond that. But wind turbines, due to the enormous stress that is put on the turbines themselves, will have to be retired much quicker, at a much faster rate, and then you end up with a lot of waste, and you need to dispose of the waste. You can of course recycle the metal compounds. The big problem, but you need recycling operations, and they take up land as well. But the big problem will be disposal of the recycling rather, of the blades. The blades are difficult to recycle because of the material they are made of, and that problem has not yet been solved, at least not satisfactorily. We also did not include the land that is required for the backup. Of course, the wind power creates the issue of intermittency. The wind doesn't always blow. And if the wind doesn't blow, you still need power. So where does the power come from? Well, you need a backup system. And the backup system, if you don't include nuclear in your backup, it will be based currently on either biomass, which has its own problems, which we will not talk about today, but they're also not insignificant, or you will have to rely on fossil fuels, which are in fact the one thing that the EU has said it wants to avoid. So that's a big problem, the land required for the backup power. We're also going to see that the best locations for wind power have already been taken up. So we've already used up all the best places to generate wind power, wind electricity. And going forward, the locations will be less efficient. And that obviously is going to have its own implications as well. If it's less efficient, you're going to produce less. You're going to need more wind turbines to produce the same amount of energy, which will further decrease the efficiency of the wind industry. Then further, we have the issue of the distance to the place where the energy is used. That distance will have to increase if you want to avoid annoying people too much, of harming human health or harming nature too much. You're going to have to move those wind farms to places that are quite distant from the coast, for instance way offshore, but that will also mean that you're going to have more losses as a result of the distance, the transmission of the power between the place where it's generated and the place where it is used increases, as a result of which you have more losses. And then what we didn't take into account is the sort of 3D aspect here, the three-dimensional aspect. We looked only at the projection of the space taken up, projected on the land surface. So we only looked in square kilometers. We did not consider the issue of 3D. Again, their wind turbines are much less attractive than nuclear power. Nuclear power doesn't raise that problem at all, but with a taller wind farm, taller wind turbines, you're going to end up higher up and taking up more space higher up in the air, which will then translate into issues around. Yes, so I'm gonna finish up. My conclusions are quite clear. The conclusions of the study are quite clear. It's actually available. Next slide, please. It's actually available on the website. It's called The Road to EU Climate Neutrality by 2020. There is a website at roadtoclimateneutrality.eu where you can download the study. And what Roos just showed you, the full report. This is only the summary of the report. It's already 50 pages. The full report is quite a lengthy document. But basically the conclusion of the entire report could be summarized in one sentence, which you will find in the report, and I'll read it out to you and then I'll stop. While nuclear power requires a tiny bit of land to provide a whole lot of power at low cost, wind and solar require a whole lot of land to produce a tiny bit of power at high cost. And that's, I think, the important distinction between the two types of technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lucas. Yeah, that's also very clear. We have time now for questions. We don't have very much time. We started some later, but let's try to stay within the time. I will give the floor to everyone, but before I first want to ask a question to all of the panelists. My first question to Professor Per Hansen, of Dr. Per Hansen is, Dr. Hansen, what do you think? Now we have only installed 16 gigawatt of wind power at sea, but the European Commission wants to go to 450 gigawatt at sea. What will be the effect for? Well, you are specialized in birds, but let's say the biodiversity. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's it's not enough. It's not. You have to make a lot more investigations in order to know if that is even possible. I doubt it's possible. I think there is enough high pressure on the environment right now, both on land and more at sea. So I doubt there will be possibility. I think it's orimligt in Swedish, unreasonable. It's too high.
for the
They have it's impossible to use so much area for this vision.
Can I conclude that it has much consequences for biodiversity?
Yes.
It should be a concern of the European
Yeah,
Commission.
it's already, about 100,000 power plants right now are already making problem. So,
Okay. Well, we want to increase it 30 times.
yes,
It's
it's way too much.
Thank you so much. Then I have a question for Professor Schrum. Is he still online? Oh, very good. Professor Schrum, what do you think? We spoke about the wind industry as a renewable. My question is it renewable?
Yes, it's a matter of space. I mean, of course, it's not coming from nowhere, but it is a question of how you get the energy to the sea surface, but it's taken from somewhere. It is perhaps renewable at the sea surface or at the height where you take it out, but it has a spatial dimension. But overall, of course, it is not an endless resource.
Thank you so much. And then my question to Professor Bergkamp. People are telling us here in Parliament that wind energy is free of cost because there is always wind. How do you look at that?
Yeah, that's probably the only thing that is free about, wind power. It's only the wind that's free. Everything else is very, very expensive. And when I use the word expensive, I don't mean only the economic cost, but as we've discussed already today, there's a lot of sort of non-economic cost, non-monetary cost involved with wind power as well. The aesthetics of it are not appreciated by many people, although some people claim they like to see wind turbines. The effect on birds, bats, insects, the effects on marine life, as we've heard today, the amount of space that's taken up that cannot be used for other purposes or only for limited other purposes. And then quite separately, you have the issue around the economic cost, and the economic cost of wind power will be astronomical because of the fact that you still need to keep a full backup system in place. You cannot say we're going to get rid of our backup. And the EU, of course, tries to suggest that can be eliminated to a large extent because they feel that everything should now be put on hydrogen and similar options. Well, we all know that hydrogen sort of poses some of the same issues as wind energy in terms of the density and so on, and the amount of energy that can be stored in it and can be extracted from it. So that will probably not be the solution. In other words, yes, the cost of wind energy is very high except for the fact that wind is free. So if you compare that to nuclear, where indeed uranium, for instance, is going to cost you a little bit, but then everything else comes at very low cost. So the total cost of these systems, of the two systems compared, you will conclude, if you do that in a reasonably objective fashion, that nuclear power is much more attractive than wind power.
Thank you so much. Then I will give the floor to the people over here. Is there anyone who wants to raise a question? I cannot see your name, but the floor is yours.
I have a question for Professor Bergkamp. In economics, and when we're talking about strategy and investments and so on, we're always talking about switching costs and also limitations of entering a market as a new player and so on. Now, do you have any idea about switching cost that the move towards renewables will have on the economy, maybe specifically on the energy companies, but more in general on the economies of the countries involved?
Shall we, shall we, okay, please try to keep it very short. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question, and you're quite right that there will be transition costs involved in moving to a new energy system. The problem there that I see is it all depends on how you do it. If you say, well, we're going to keep the full backup system in place all the time, so we will not have a problem of any blackouts in our system. That's of course important to know. Energy security, power security is very important to industry, to investment and so on. So if you can guarantee the power security, the main issue then that you have to deal with is the question around cost. Can you keep the cost sufficiently down so that investing in Europe will remain attractive? And I think that's where the main problem arises. It doesn't look like we're able to do it. So in other words, it looks like the transition cost will be very high because basically it will mean that you will have significant deindustrialization throughout Europe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Beatrice Timgren from Sweden, and I have a question. We have noticed that the wind turbines cause burst painful way, and we have also seen that things affect the environmental. And fishermen also report that the fish disappear from this area. And my question, Professor Scherm, do you also observe that the fish disappear? And do you have some theories why they disappear from this kind of area? Thank you.
The question is to Professor Schrammer.
Yes.
Is she still online?
Now I can speak. Didn't have the right to speak. Not in that generality. There are species which seem to be attracted by the wind farms, and there are species which disappear. So it's a change in the structure of the food web. So it's not only adverse effects, but there are also for some species beneficial effects. So it's a little bit more complicated in that sense. But when you look into causes, of course we are just in the beginning of this kind of research, but there are structural changes in primary production, and that gives let's say the input to the ecosystem. And we see areas where production increase, but we also see areas where production decrease. And as a consequence, you will also see the changes in the food web, in the upper trophic river. It is a disturbance, but it's not resulting in an overall decrease of primary production if you look at that for the entire sea.
Thank you so much, Professor Schrum. I suggest that we have one more question, and then it's time to go to the next panel. The gentleman on the other side.
I have a question for Dr. Per Hansson.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Timothy. I'm from Sweden also. Yeah. And my question is, how did the environmental NGOs react to your research about bottleneck sites for threatened raptors? And have you been invited to elucidate these findings? And if so, what do you think the reasons might be?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think I mentioned something about it, but I can repeat that I have not been especially invited to the bigger environmental NGOs. I think they believe much in wind power. They like wind power, so they avoid things that could be negative. So, and my findings actually, I don't think they are much negative. I think it's a cost-effective way of protecting some areas and leaving other for wind and other energy sources. So, yeah, maybe that's a longer answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a short question and a short answer. That's very good. If there is one more question, I think we can do it. Otherwise, one more question, and then that's the last one.
My name is Wout from Belgium. Why is it so that we are in this situation for many years now that there are serious doubts about renewable energies, but nobody listens, or at least very few people listen? It's because of the fact that the renewable energy policy is based on two fears. fears of nuclear energy and fears of climate. And fears are things that you do not change easily. And as the European Commission and the European world, political world keeps pushing, telling people that if the European policy on renewable is not executed, we are heading against these two fears, I think we are in a very difficult fight. Now, how to address these fears, I do not know.
And do you also have a question?
I beg pardon?
Do you have also a question for the panelists?
Well, I think it's both of you, Professor, you have not been listened to by, simply because you are. It's easy to answer that you are not the right person because fears are stronger than facts.
Yes, I agree. It's a very interesting thought and hypothesis that there is fear in the back, and we don't think when we are scared. We don't think good, so we should try. I don't know how, but I agree with you. We should avoid being scared.
There's of course also the issue around the exploitation of fear and the extent to which political and economic interests will utilize fear to achieve other objectives. And that's, I think, where we currently see that there are entrenched interests, vested interests in expanding wind industry, for instance, because you can make money, you can gain political power, and also achieve political agendas to the extent that there are other agendas that are advanced by the wind industry. For instance, an agenda that looks at degrowth, which is something that this parliament, many parties would in fact endorse, degrowth. Well, wind industry is probably a good thing. That will advance also the degrowth agenda. And once you start thinking along those lines, then fear is something to be exploited to pursue this other agenda. And I think that's what we currently see, that you have a mix of sort of fear in the general public, but also exploitation of the fear by political and economic interests.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That with this we come to the end of this panel. I want to ask you to give a warm applause to the panelists for their here. I want to give the floor to my colleague, Mrs. Anna Zalewska. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Dzień dobry, będę mówiła w języku polskim, dlatego proszę założyć słuchawki. Dzisiaj, dziękując za zaproszenie, chcę przedstawić tych, którzy będą razem ze mną dyskutowali. Mamy tutaj kilka osób. Pana Fabien Ferreri, proszę wybaczyć, jeżeli popełniam jakiś błąd. To między innymi przewodniczący stowarzyszenia będzie mówił o tym, jak się żyje w instalacji 5 turbin wiatrowych. Później mamy państwa z Holandii, rybaków, Dirkreka i Job Scotta i Dana Rasmussona. I my będziemy się skupiać wokół tego, jakie są emocje społeczne wokół lokalizacji farm wiatrowych. Dlaczego ja? W Polsce przez 6 lat stałam na przodzie grupy, która liczyła 1 200 000 obywateli, którzy absolutnie nie zgadzali się na to, żeby elektrownie wiatrowe stały im na podwórkach. Lobbyści wiatrowi bardzo agresywni, zresztą z dużymi pieniędzmi, przekupywali lokalne społeczności. 2-3 mieszkańców wsi w pełnej tajemnicy trzymało te informacje, po czym mieszkańcy dowiadywali się, że 17-21 turbin wiatrowych stanie wtedy, kiedy już właściwie zjeżdżały maszyny. Trzeba było to prawnie uporządkować. W związku z tym rzeczywiście po zmianie rządów, mimo że byłam ministrem edukacji, jeszcze przypilnowałam, żeby oddalić elektrownie wiatrowe ku absolutnej histerii lobby wiatrowego. Także rzeczywiście w Polsce zapanował spokój. Teraz KPO wymusiło na nas mały ruch o 200 metrów, to jest 700 metrów od domów i obowiązek, aby to było w planie zagospodarowania przestrzennego. To znaczy inaczej elektrowni wiatrowych nie można postawić. To po pierwsze. Po drugie, jestem w Komisji Środowiska i bacznie śledzę, co się dzieje z energią odnawialną, szczególnie z elektrowniami wiatrowymi, bo chcę Państwu powiedzieć, że w biurze politycznym Franza Timmermansa, który już odszedł ze swojej funkcji, byli lobbyści zajmujący się elektrowniami wiatrowymi, więc pewne przepisy były odzwierciedleniem takiego ogromnego lobby w Komisji Europejskiej i mamy dokumenty, które chcą spowodować, aby elektrownie wiatrowe były inwestycjami celu publicznego. To znaczy będą traktowane jak sieci przesyłowe i autostrady, czyli tak naprawdę gdziekolwiek sobie zażyczą, tam będą stawiać elektrownie wiatrowe, ewentualnie jakieś odszkodowanie zapłacą, jak się komuś nie będzie podobać, to będą to różnego rodzaju procesy sądowe. Chcę też powiedzieć, że zapominamy o tym, że elektrownie wiatrowe, mimo że widnieją w taksonomii jako tak zwane zielone inwestycje, są greenwashingiem. Dlatego, że wyprodukowanie elektrowni wiatrowych powoduje ogromną emisję dwutlenku węgla. Od żelazobetonu, na którym trzeba posadowić elektrownię, do stali, która przecież inaczej się nie produkuje jak przy pomocy węgla koksującego, czy też samych łopat, smarów, brak możliwości utylizacji. Jednocześnie nikt nie chce tego naukowo policzyć, mimo że ci, którzy przychodzą na przykład do Komisji Petycji w Parlamencie Europejskim, za każdym razem proszą Komisję Europejską czy Agencję Środowiska, tą Europejską Agencję Środowiska, dobrze policzmy wszystko, dajmy obiektywny obraz tego, jaki jest koszt i jak to jest z tą emisją dwutlenku węgla, bo bardzo wielu naukowców przychyla się do tego, że ekspozycja czy praca elektrowni wiatrowej nie jest w stanie odrobić tego śladu węglowego, który powstaje przy produkcji elektrowni wiatrowych. Jednocześnie proszę zauważyć, i pewnie też o tym Państwo będą dyskutować lub dyskutowaliście, że tak naprawdę elektrownie wiatrowe mają wszystko za darmo. To znaczy nie tylko pierwszeństwo w przyłączeniu do sieci, ewentualnie odszkodowania za to, że nie zostały przyłączone, dodatkowe różnego rodzaju certyfikaty, tak naprawdę umorzenie pożyczek i kredytów na to, jak zaciągają w bankach, kiedy chcą lokalizować farmy wiatrowe i bezwzględny nakaz w każdej administracji krajów członkowskich, żeby ta energia była promowana. To jest absolutna dysfunkcja, jeżeli chodzi o równość inwestycji, równość gospodarczą. To wszystko powoduje, że rzeczywiście budzi to ogromne emocje, szczególnie wśród społeczeństwa, która po pierwsze domaga się badania, w tym hałasu. Nie ma takich, oczywiście są różne badania, ale my chcemy, żeby to było Komisja Europejska, Agencja Środowiska, jak również tego, na co nie wiem, czy Państwo zwracają uwagę, ale to jest dramat również w Europie. Nikt nie bada wód gruntowych. To jest duża ingerencja w środowisko, w ziemię. Mamy kłopot z wodą. W związku z tym rzeczywiście to jest takie duże wyzwanie, które stoi przed nami. Dość powiedzieć, że Komisja Europejska zasądziła Niemcy, nie wiem czy Państwo wiedzą o ostatnim wyroku Trybunału Sprawiedliwości, która pokazała, że Niemcy nie zrealizowały między innymi dyrektywy środowiskowej, nie utworzyły obszarów Natury 2000 właśnie poprzez zaburzenie nadmiernego inwestowania między innymi w energię odnawialną, bo wbrew pozorom i mimo zaklęć takich trochę ideologicznych, to nie sprzyja bioróżnorodności. Więc myślę, że nasi paneliści będą zwracać uwagę na to wszystko i powiedzą nam, jak się żyje i jakie mają kłopoty, też i administracyjne, żeby swoich praw związanych z krajobrazem, z naturą, z ptakami, ze spokojem w jakikolwiek w swoich krajach członkowskich, czy też w Unii Europejskiej egzekwować. To może zaczniemy od pana Fabiena Ferreri. Dobrze wypowiadam nazwisko?
Monsieur Roos, Monsieur Roos, Madame Zalewska, Mesdames et Messieurs les parlementaires, Mesdames et Messieurs, first of all, I want to thank you for this invitation to this conference, which will allow me to discuss the consequence of installation of 5 wind turbines between my home in the French village of Échauffour in Normandy. If you allow me, I will express myself in French because I do not master the technical subtleties of the English language on this particular subject, where even more than elsewhere, I think the devil is in the details. Alors, je voudrais dire d'abord que le cas du bruit de la centrale éolienne d'Échauffour en France n'est pas un cas particulier. De nombreuses situations similaires sont documentées partout en France et certainement aussi à l'étranger. Je connais moins le cas de l'étranger. Échauffour a seulement été un cas beaucoup plus médiatisé et surtout pour la première fois en France, il a vu la mise à l'arrêt d'une centrale éolienne par décision des autorités de l'État. Je vais y revenir. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi de me présenter. Je m'appelle Fabien Ferreri, je suis né il y a quelques années à Paris. J'ai toujours vécu et travaillé dans des grandes villes, j'ai travaillé aussi à l'étranger, j'ai travaillé dans le monde du cinéma où j'étais chef-monteur. Donc tout ça pour vous dire que le bruit, je ne dirais pas que c'est un vieil ami, mais c'est quand même une vieille connaissance. Il y a 8 ans, un peu après les attentats de Paris, non celui du Bataclan, ma femme et moi-même, on a décidé de quitter Paris et de s'installer à la campagne. Et notre choix s'est porté sur ce village de Normandie, Échauffour, qui est un petit village de 740 habitants, où naissent quelques-uns des plus grands chevaux de course de trot internationaux. Un environnement totalement préservé. On est sur une propriété de 2,5 hectares au cœur du zone Natura 2000, où on trouve encore des espèces d'insectes qui ont disparu d'une grande partie de la Normandie. Voilà, environnement particulièrement préservé. Et ce qui a présidé à notre décision, c'était surtout une volonté de vivre à des rythmes différents, de rompre avec l'anonymat des grandes agglomérations et d'expérimenter au quotidien une vision qu'on avait et des engagements écologiques. Et donc on a fait le choix, des choix professionnels qui nous ont permis de rendre cette vie possible. Lorsqu'on est arrivé à Échauffour, c'était aux environs de 2015 je crois, nous savions que la société Échauffour Énergie, qui est une filiale de la société Voltalia qui est détenue par le groupe Muliez, que vous devez tous connaître, on savait qu'ils avaient obtenu 6 permis de construire pour l'implantation de 5 éoliennes et d'un poste de livraison sur la commune d'Échauffour. Ils avaient obtenu ces permis le 8 mars 2013. Et c'est un projet qui avait toujours été soutenu par les agriculteurs de notre commune, et principalement ceux du conseil proche du maire, en fait, du conseil municipal. Mais il était combattu avec acharnement par une association qui se battait, et on avait le sentiment que ce projet ne se ferait pas quand on s'est installé. Néanmoins, ma femme et moi-même, on avait vraiment toute confiance dans nos autorités municipales, dans nos autorités préfectorales et puis surtout dans notre État français pour contrôler l'installation de ces machines si elles devaient avoir lieu. Et on avait vraiment tort. En fait. Les 5 éoliennes, je vais vous rappeler juste rapidement les détails techniques, ce sont des Senvion à même 100 qui font à hauteur de moyeu 95 mètres, 140 mètres en bout de pale et qui ont une puissance nominale individuelle de 2,05 MW. Ont été mises en service industriel au printemps 2019, avant même que soit rendue la décision de justice qui les autorisait à les mettre en route. Et dès ce moment, la plupart des riverains situés dans un périmètre de 1500 mètres de ce site industriel ont fait état de très violentes nuisances sonores de jour et de nuit, liées au fonctionnement des machines, bien évidemment. À notre domicile, les nuisances sonores se manifestaient uniquement dans les périodes et dans les secteurs de vent qui étaient dans notre direction. Mais dès lors que le bruit se manifestait, on était réveillé 30 fois dans la nuit, On ne pouvait pas sortir de notre maison, on ne pouvait pas rester à l'extérieur. Et comme je vous disais, le bruit, je connais, j'ai vécu dedans, je vis avec. On a dormi cette nuit à Bruxelles, dans le quartier de la gare du Midi. J'ai mieux dormi dans le quartier de la gare du Midi avec les fenêtres ouvertes qu'à Chauffour avec les éoliennes qui tournent. Et ce qu'on ressentait, c'est que le bruit à l'extérieur, les pièces qui résonnaient au rythme des rotors. Donc dès lors, pour sauver notre vie, j'ai engagé un combat médiatique et un combat sur les réseaux sociaux pour sauver notre santé, notre espace de vie, et surtout pour que nos droits fassent droit. Ce concept était vraiment important pour moi, que nos droits fassent droit. J'ai envoyé des plaintes, des alertes par mail à des listes de diffusion politique, associatives, journalistiques, locales, nos élus. J'ai écrit à la préfecture, à la DREAL, qui est la police des installations classées et de ces machines, au Premier ministre de la France, à Monsieur le Président de la République française à plusieurs reprises. Et j'avais du temps pour faire ça, dans la mesure où j'étais réveillé 30 fois dans la nuit où je dormais plus, j'avais vraiment le temps de me consacrer à ces lettres de plainte. Et finalement, faute d'être écouté, j'ai fini par être entendu. À la demande de la préfecture de l'Orne et de nos élus du département normand, différentes campagnes de mesures acoustiques ont été mises en route par l'exploitant. Elles ont toutes démontré la persistance de non-conformité d'émergence sonore dans plusieurs zones du site, et ce, malgré la mise en place de nombreux plans de brisage successifs. Le 19 octobre 2020, lors d'une troisième campagne de mesures acoustiques menée par l'exploitant, le bureau d'études a perdu 1 mois de données collectées qui étaient sur la période la plus critique en termes de bruit. On a réussi à prouver que cette perte de données était volontaire parce que techniquement, les micros enregistrent sur des cartes mémoire toutes les données et elles sont retransmises toutes les 5 minutes à l'exploitant par GSM. Compliqué de perdre des données dans ces conditions. Donc on a réussi à prouver ce qu'on a considéré comme une manipulation, et cette manipulation a été sanctionnée par les préfectures. Je vais citer l'arrêté qu'a rendu monsieur le préfet de l'Orne, enfin madame la préfète de l'Orne à l'époque. Afin de limiter les nuisances qu'engendrent les non-conformités acoustiques, il est pris une mesure exceptionnelle de suspension en application de l'article L512-20 du Code de l'environnement. C'était la première fois en France qu'on mettait à l'arrêt une centrale éolienne. Cet arrêté préfectoral en fait, impose un arrêt partiel et temporaire de la centrale éolienne des Chauffours de 5 mois pour les horaires de soirée, c'est-à-dire de 19h à 22h, et de nuit de 22h à 7h. Et cet arrêté préfectoral était assorti d'une autre mesure qui imposait la réalisation d'une tierce expertise. Tout ça c'était le 12 mars 2021. En fait, l'objectif qui était donné, qui était fixé au tiers expert, c'était d'analyser la fiabilité des rapports acoustiques établis par l'exploitant et ses prestataires, de réaliser des mesures complémentaires afin de formuler des recommandations permettant à l'exploitant de définir un plan de bridage conforme aux exigences réglementaires en matière d'émergence sonore. Et le délai prévu pour cette tierce expertise était également de 5 mois, durée de l'arrêt des machines. En fait, il a été prolongé jusqu'en juin 2022. En fait, ce qui s'est avéré, c'est que la nomination de ce tiers expert, qui était censé être impartial, indépendant et neutre, ce monsieur était directeur général d'un groupe qui s'appelle Gamba Acoustique, qui est une société, un bureau d'études très connu dans le monde entier d'ailleurs. Il s'est avéré, sur une proposition des services du ministère de l'Environnement quand même, ça a soulevé bien des polémiques et des très vives critiques de la part des experts avec qui nous travaillons en tant qu'association et des gens qui, dans les commissions ministérielles, avaient croisé ce monsieur. En fait, il s'est avéré que ce monsieur était un architecte majeur d'une méthode polémique de mesure du bruit éolien, imposée par arrêté ministériel en France en 2011 et appliquée ensuite dans toutes les études d'impact et de mise en service des aérogénérateurs français. Ce projet de norme s'appelait le PRNFS 31114, le projet de norme 31114, dont on a beaucoup parlé. Et en fait, cette méthode visait à limiter la réalité des émergences sonores et à nier les caractéristiques du bruit éolien. Elle réussissait en fait ce tour de force, non pas d'atténuer les nuisances sonores subies par les riverains, mais de les rendre réglementaires à proximité de leurs habitations. Afin de donner une dimension incontestable, réglementaire incontestable à ce projet, ce monsieur a ensuite été animateur d'un groupe en France, un groupe AFNOR, organisme de normalisation, Ce groupe AFNOR s'appelait Commission S30J Bruit dans l'environnement, qui visait à normer la mesure du bruit éolien. Or, l'intransigeance de ce monsieur, que nous avons comme tiers expert, et sa volonté acharnée à défendre les intérêts de la filière éolienne ont amené à la dissolution de cette commission. Ce projet de norme, finalement, a été imposé d'autorité par Madame la ministre de l'Environnement, après le travail d'un groupe restreint qui après avoir en fait exclu les représentants des riverains de ces commissions, a rendu une décision sous la forme d'un arrêté et d'un protocole de mesure du bruit éolien qui a fait l'objet d'une décision de reconnaissance du ministre le 31 mars 2022. Voilà, donc décision unilatérale où on a publié un nouveau protocole de mesure du bruit éolien qui s'est imposé et qui s'impose désormais à tous les Français. Alors je précise qu'on a lancé une requête en annulation contre ce nouveau protocole auprès du Conseil d'État en France et que cette action est en cours. On a reçu le mémoire en réponse du ministère, on est en train de formuler nos réponses et ça va passer dans le Conseil d'État, j'espère très bientôt, et on espère bien voir l'annulation de ce nouveau protocole. Mais à Échauffour, toutes nos remarques qui étaient motivées, documentées sur le manque de légitimité du tiers expert, elles ont toutes été ignorées et balayées par la préfecture de l'Orne en charge du dossier. La réunion de clôture s'est basée sur le rapport de cet expert, a conclu à la conformité du parc, qui a été remise en route le 24 juillet 2022, de jour comme de nuit. Il y a bien une commission de suivi du site qui existe aujourd'hui, mais voilà. Donc en fait aujourd'hui à Échauffour, les nuisances sonores, vibratoires et lumineuses des éoliennes, elles perdurent de jour et de nuit, mais les plaintes des riverains, elles ne sont plus recevables parce que ces nuisances sont reconnues désormais comme réglementaires. Voilà. Et la cause en est la modification unilatérale de la réglementation sur la mesure du bruit français des éoliennes. En fait, la pression de la filière éolienne au sein de nos commissions gouvernementales, la volonté de déployer des machines en libérant des contraintes réglementaires et en accélérant les processus administratifs, a amené à une aberration. Sacrifier l'environnement, la santé et le patrimoine des populations riveraines au nom de la préservation de ces mêmes valeurs. Plus grave encore, et que c'est de là-dessus que principalement nous nous battons, c'est que la législation française sur le bruit éolien a introduit une modification particulièrement dangereuse de la notion même de bruit, réduite désormais à celle d'un indicateur d'émergence, établi sur la base d'artifices statistiques et d'un calcul médiane. Alors je rappelle qu'en statistique, la médiane, c'est vous avez une distribution de valeurs, vous ne gardez que la valeur centrale, c'est-à-dire vous écartez les valeurs les plus hautes, les valeurs les plus basses. Et cet indicateur, il est complètement décorrélé de la réalité des nuisances réelles subies. Il n'a plus rien de comparable désormais avec les critères de santé publique sur lesquels il s'appuyait en droit français. Je pense que si nous n'y prenons pas garde, cette dangereuse déviance dérogatoire qui permet de masquer tous les problèmes de bruit risque de se généraliser et sera reprise pour être appliquée à toutes les installations classées pour la protection de l'environnement. Je pense qu'il peut être aussi étendu à tous les bruits de voisinage et qu'il faussera finalement la définition même du bruit dans l'environnement. Si je peux transmettre un souhait de la part de nos associations, j'ai la chance d'être reçu par vous ici, nous avons signé la pétition qui a été présentée et on attend vraiment qu'un de nos parlementaires aujourd'hui saisisse une résolution d'initiative et qu'il y ait enfin une décision du Parlement sur ces questions. C'est, je pense, une urgence pour nous tous. Je vous remercie pour votre écoute.
Thank you very much for your very important history. And next speakers, Dirk Craig and Job Scott. Yes.
Hello, I'm Job Scott. I will keep my speech in Dutch, so take your headphones. Ten eerste, Rob Roos, dank dat we hier het podium krijgen om onze stem te laten horen. Ik ben Job Schot en afkomstig uit een eeuwenoud vissersgeslacht in Nederland, al 42 jaar op zee. Dus bang ben ik niet. Ik heb alle stormen en alle weersomstandigheden getrotseerd. Ik ben eigenlijk bijna geboren op het water en ze zeggen van ons als Schotten, we hebben geen bloed in onze aderen, maar we hebben zoutwater erin. Dus ik praat echt als een ervaringsdeskundige en we hebben het gezien veranderen de laatste 42 jaar dat ik op zee ben. Wat er allemaal verandert en zeker de laatste 10 jaar wat er allemaal op ons afkomt. En we hebben nu de derde meeting eigenlijk hier in het Europarlement. En iedere keer is de problematiek op tafel gelegd. En wat is er nou ondertussen veranderd? NAVO. En dat is een groot probleem. Ik wil verder gaan met mijn speech te lezen. Ik ben gestopt met mijn bedrijf 3 weken geleden, onder andere door de volgende bedreigingen die op ons afkomen. En dat is voor ons nu die offshore windenergie. Voor de visserij gewoon een groot drama. Deze grootschalige industrialisatie van de noordelijke zeeën hebben rampzalige gevolgen voor het mariene leven, waaronder de visbestanden en de visserij. Die veranderingen die nemen we nu al waar als vissers en wetenschappelijke rapporten bevestigen dit. Laat u niet in de maling nemen dat in windparken een paradijs zou ontstaan van biodiversiteit. Het tegendeel blijkt waar te zijn. En op mossels, oesters en zeewier zitten we niet te wachten. Bubbelschermen tijdens het heien van de turbinepalen is een doekje voor het bloeden. Kunststriffen, oesterplatforms, etc. is de vlag die de lading moet dekken. Ze horen niet in de zee thuis, zoals windturbines niet in onze noordelijke zeeën thuis horen. Geplaatst op onze beste visgronden. De vis en de visser heeft het nakijken. Inspraak hebben we niet of nauwelijks of nooit gehad. En coexistentie is een veel gebruikt woord, maar waar in de praktijk helaas weinig of niets van terecht komt. Integendeel, de visserij wordt geframed en beschuldigd van bodemberoering en aantasting van de biodiversiteit. Gebieden, onder andere de Doggersbank, wordt gesloten voor de visserij en even later worden er honderden windturbines neergezet en het plan is er om een eiland op te spuiten op de Doggersbank. What about biodiversity? De windindustrie stort duizenden tonnen stortstenen in windparken rond de turbinepoten. Geulen van 5 meter diep worden er geploegd in de zeebodem met een ploeg van 200 ton zwaar en voortgetrokken met een schip van 10.000 pk om die geulen in de zeebodem te trekken. What about bodemberoering? De grotendeels ongecontroleerde uitrol van windparken, zoals ook mijn buurman er net al zegt, er is geen controle op en als er al een wetgeving is, wordt die niet gecontroleerd. Zoals in de visserij, wij worden dag en nacht gecontroleerd met 3, 4 volgsystemen wat we hebben. En hier is totaal geen controle op. Dat betekent dat de aanvoer van verse wild gevangen vis in gevaar komt. Dus die voedselzekerheid wordt bedreigd. Met als gevolg dat de consument geen wild gevangen vis meer op zijn bord krijgt. Onze vis, die eigenlijk het enige voedsel is op aarde, wat niet is gemanipuleerd zoals vlees, groenten en kweekvis. Onze vis, die onder andere vanwege de korte aanvoerlijn de laagste eco-footprint heeft. Onze vis, die niet vol zit met antibiotica en pesticiden. En eerst een wereldreis achter de rug heeft om op het bord van de consument te komen. Onze vis, die zit vol met omega-3 vetzuur, dat super gezond is en wat kweekvis ontbeert. Onze vis, die zorgt voor de regionale werkgelegenheid. Voor iedere visser op zee hebben er 3 of 4 mensen werk aan de wal in toeleveringsbedrijven en in de vissenwerking. En dat geldt voor heel de Europese visbedrijven. Sta mij toe dat ik de onvoorstelbare nadelige effecten op het mariene ecosysteem door de uitrol van offshore windenergie benoem. Ten eerste, voor het heien van de windturbinepalen in de zeebodem zijn enorme krachten nodig, welke geluidsexplosies veroorzaken die de wettelijke norm van 160 decibel ver overtreft en alle vis in een wijde straal dood of doof maakt. De tweede, het infrasonele geluid veroorzaakt door de windturbines wat zich over een grote afstand voorplant. Dit lage geluid verjaagt de vis uit de windparken. De onderzeese transportkabels veroorzaken een elektromagnetisch veld, wat natuurlijke migratie van vis, schaal- en schelpdieren tegengaat. En dat is ook, nemen wij waar, en dat nemen ze ook aan de oostkust van Amerika waar, aan Martha's Vineyard, waar die migratie van kreeft en krabben gewoon teniet gedaan wordt door de kabels die daar van naar de wal lopen. En die visserlui die zien hun vangsten voor meer dan de helft afnemen. Ten vierde, de zee- en luchtstromingen worden door de aanleg van offshore windparken veranderd, wat klimaatverandering tot gevolg heeft. De gelaagdheid van het water verdwijnt door mixing van het water veroorzaakt door de windturbinepalen. Ten vijfde, aanvaringen met windparken die zijn niet denkbeeldig. Dit hebben we vorig jaar gezien met de Juliette D en de Maersk Nimbus en de Diamond Sky. De noordelijke zeeën gelden als de drugsbevaren zeeën ter wereld, waar windparken langs de verkeersscheidingsstelsels staan. Een simpele navigatiefout, een blackout en een rampscenario is een feit. Milieuverontreinigingen door fragmenten PFAS van de turbinebladen, olie uit de tandwielkasten die lekken of ververst worden, zware metalen die vrijkomen van de anodes die op de turbinepalen zitten onder water. Vissers zijn goed van doordrongen dat er een klimaatverandering gaande is. Dat nemen we zelf waar. En bijvoorbeeld de andere soorten vis die we vangen, in verhouding met vroeger. We begrijpen ook als sector dat er een energietransitie nodig is, maar zien in een offshore windenergie geen oplossing voor een energietransitie. Er is ons als vissers alles aan gelegen dat het ecosysteem en de visstand gezond blijft. Collega visserlui en ikzelf zien in de nabijheid van windparken de visserij afnemen. De windparken zelf zijn voor ons al een verboden gebied en beslaan in de toekomst zo'n 25 à 30% van de noordelijke Noordzee en van de zuidelijke Noordzee. Dan nog 30% gesloten gebieden, volgens de Green Deal van Frans Timmermans. Dan nog 10 à 15% verboden gebied of met de restricties de verkeersscheidingsstelsels. En zo worden wij als Indianen in een klein reservaat teruggedrongen en wordt vissen op een postzegel werkelijkheid. Laten we lering trekken uit het verleden. Door de deltawerken en het afsluiten van de Zuiderzee werden we beter beschermd tegen de zee. Toen ik vroeger een klein kind was, maakte mijn vader een klein netje en bij ons voor de deur, diep in de Zeeuwse delta, vingen we gewoon allemaal ondermaatse kleine vis die daar geboren werden. Het was bij ons kinderkamergebied. Nou, dat was fantastisch zoveel vis dat er zat. Het was eigenlijk de kinderkamer voor de zuidelijke Noordzee. En we kregen de deltawerken en het is allemaal dood. Dus een heel ecosysteem is daar om zeep geholpen. En dat kwam door menselijk ingrijpen. Is het dan nu niet zaak om uiterst behoedzaam om te gaan met de natuur en de voorzorgsprincipes te handhaven? Een belangrijk, kwetsbaar ecosysteem. De noordelijke zeeën die een enorme biodiversiteit, dynamiek en productiviteit in zich herbergen. Daar gaan we toch niet een industriegebied van maken en opofferen op het altaar van de zogenaamde transitie naar groene energie, die allerminst groen blijkt te zijn. Ik heb een oproep. Ten eerste, we roepen onze Europarlementariërs daar ook met klem op om de bouw en de ontwikkeling van offshore windparken te stoppen en eerst goed onderzoek te laten doen naar de gevaren en negatieve effecten op het ecosysteem. Ten tweede, respecteer de historische visgronden van onze vissers. Ten derde, geef vissers inspraak en compensatie voor verlies van de visgronden. Ten vierde, de huidige MER-rapporten, als die al er zijn, die moeten gerespecteerd worden. En voor de rest zijn er voor de grote windparken is er nog geen milieueffectenreportage. Ten vijfde, het OSPAR-verdrag uit 1998 in zaken de bescherming van het mariene milieu in de noordelijke zeeën, waarin staat dat nieuwe gebruikers geen extra belasting mogen zijn voor het ecosysteem. Dit verdrag dat moet gerespecteerd worden en niet skippen zoals nu gedaan wordt. Ten zesde, het voorzorgsprincipe moet gerespecteerd worden. Ten zevende, het rapport van Peter van Dalen uit 2019 moet leidend zijn in de marine spatial planning en coexistentie tussen windparkexploitanten en visserij. Ten achtste, preventieve maatregelen moeten genomen worden om de impact op het zeemilieu te voorkomen en te beperken. Ten negende, voedselzekerheid vanuit onze noordelijke wateren is bij wet vastgelegd en moet gegarandeerd worden door de overheid. Ten tiende, ook de goede resultaten van het gemeenschappelijke visserijbeleid, die instaat voor een duurzame visserij, worden door de bouw van offshore windparken teniet gedaan. We moeten samen zorgen voor een gezonde zee. Een zee belangrijk voor ons klimaat. Een zee belangrijk voor ons als bron van goed voedsel. Ik dank u.
Thank you very much. And next, Mr. Dan Rasmussen.
Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. Enchanté, or dzień dobry to my Polish friends. My name is Dan Rasmussen, and I serve as the oppositional counsel in a region in northern Sweden called Västernorrland. And believe it or not, despite many maps cutting EU cutting Sweden in half, there is actually a Sweden north of Stockholm as well. So be advised of that. Next slide, please. The EU's influence on local governance and national decision-making can often present significant challenges for local politicians like myself. While the EU aims to harmonize laws and create cohesion among its member states, it can lead to a loss of local autonomy. We constantly need to face the struggle of trying to balance the desires and needs of our constituents and local residents with the directives and regulations imposed on us by the European Union, among others. One of the major challenges that I encounter is the issue of excessive centralization and micromanagement by the EU. While the intention is to create uniform policies, it can hinder the decision-making process at the local level. And the dream world of having a one-size-fits-all system, which the EU often demands, often produces more hindrance than gains. And as a representative of my community, I am acutely aware of the unique circumstances and needs of my constituents. However, the top-down approach of the EU often overlooks these nuances, which makes it difficult to effectively serve the best interest of my local residents. And let's not forget how these directives can go directly against the nation's self-determination rights and the right to self-governance by the local politicians. Next slide, please. I have witnessed the impact wind power has on local communities. And while wind power is often touted as a clean and renewable energy source, it's not without its drawbacks, as we've heard today. And one of the significant challenges that I face is witnessing how wind power projects can tear communities apart. The residents of Örnsköldsvik in Västernorrland are rare exceptions to this, where they have been fighting together against the production of a huge wind power industry for almost 10 years now. And they're very resilient, and I actually admire their tenacity to keep fighting. This is, after all, David versus Goliath battle. When ordinary people question the viability or impact of wind power, they often find themselves at a huge disadvantage due to their limited experience and resources. Unlike the large corporations driving the wind power industry forward, these individuals may not have access to judicial help or the financial means to oppose wind power locally. Large corporations in the wind power industry possess considerable influence and resources, and that can be very intimidating for the individuals seeking to voice their legitimate concerns. These companies have extensive network, they have lobbying power, and they have financial backing, making it difficult for these ordinary people to compete on an equal playing field. The asymmetry of power can discourage individuals from challenging wind power at all, fearing the potential consequence or backlash that they may face locally. However, the most concerning that I can see is the impact it has on property values. The mere discussion of wind power turbines locally decreases the values of your homes, which make them more challenging to sell or even to refinance and renovate. This fact also creates friction between the landowners, who sometimes don't even live in the area themselves, who can see this as an economic opportunity to have wind power turbines on their land, and the local community, who face the financial losses as well as losses to their social well-being. In Sweden, we have actually an appropriation law where you can sell your residence for 125% of market value when people are making wind power very, really close. So you can't have your home anymore. But the problem with that is, when do you assess how much the property is worth? Because 125% of €0 is still €0. So the lack of transparency can further deepen the divide within the community and the local authorities. And some residents may feel, and rightfully I may add, that their concerns are being sometimes disregarded in favor of meeting these so-called renewable energy targets set by the EU and national governments. And in those moments, I would like to remind everyone for whom we actually are supposed to be serving. Next slide. When it comes to wind power specifically, there are already rules and guidelines to follow in Sweden. First and foremost, it is the operator, that is the company responsible for dismantling of the wind power turbines when they are no longer in power, so to speak. Then the responsibility goes to the landowner, and lastly to the public, regions and municipalities to provide for the dismantling of the wind power turbines. And the risk with this is that if the company that owns the wind industry realizes that their wind turbines are about to no longer be effective, they can go bankrupt. And then if the landowners cannot dismantle the facility, that means that all the costs will end up with the municipalities, regions, or municipal associations in Sweden. And we're all aware of the situation in Denmark where decommissioned wind turbines stand as steel skeletons in the landscape. Chapter 16, Section 3 of the Environmental Code in Sweden mentions that the state, regions and municipal associations are not required to ask for economic securities when it comes to wind power. This means that in cases where the municipality is governed by politicians who are blinded by ideological climate and energy hysteria, they can potentially be exploited and let the local residents instead bear all the cost of dismantling these facilities and restoring the land to its original state. So how can we combat that in Sweden, for example? Well, that we can do by revising the environmental code, of course. I'm proposing, for example, the introduction of a mandatory scrappage premium during the construction of new wind power installations. And in the last slide that I have here, I will leave my name and email on the display if anyone would have a question to me after the event as well. After all, dialogue is the first step towards making meaningful progress. Thank you for listening, and remember, there is a Sweden north of Stockholm as well.
Thank you very much, and we have timing for questions.
Okay, that's good.
Yes?
Well, I have a question for our fisherman job. I will do it in Dutch, so with the translation. Job, je had het over nieuwe gebruikers. Jullie als vissermannen, mag ik wel zeggen. Jullie zijn er al voor eeuwen, je vader ook, je opa, eigenlijk van generatie op generatie maken jullie al gebruik van de Noordzee als vismannen. Maar nu zijn jullie volgens mij gedefinieerd als nieuwe gebruikers, waardoor rechten vervallen zijn. Hoe ziet dat? En ten opzichte ook van de, voor mij zijn de industrie met de windturbines de nieuwe gebruikers. Hoe verhoudt zich dat? Kan je dat uitleggen? Dank u.
Nou ja, dat dachten wij ook, dat natuurlijk als oudste gebruiker van de zee, dat we de meeste rechten hadden. En in 1998 heeft de baggersector hebben de status gekregen van bestaand gebruiker, historieel gebruiker. En waarschijnlijk hebben onze visserijvoermannen in die tijd gewoon geslapen en gedacht van het zal wel meevallen en ja, wat moeten we mee? Maar nu blijkt dat vooral in het vissen in Natura-gebieden die status van bestaand gebruiker als nieuwe of de status van een nieuwe gebruiker, dat is wel een heel groot verschil. Want als je een oude gebruiker bent, dan kun je gewoon volstaan met hetgeen je hebt van qua schip en qua katalysator en noem maar op. Ben je een nieuwe gebruiker, dan moet je voldoen aan alle emissie-eisen die gesteld worden, wil je mogen vissen of operationeel wezen in dat gebied. Nou, voor de offshore windindustrie, volgens mij zijn er helemaal geen restricties voor. En of dat ze als nieuwe gebruiker gezien worden of als historieel gebruiker, ook daar is niets van bekend. Nee, alleen de visserij, die wordt langs die meetlat gelegd en de baggersector. En daarom zei ik net ook, die visserij die wordt zo geframed op het moment. Als je het in een concept door CO-akkoord wordt er gewoon door de windindustrie een alinea opgenomen waarin staat, ja, de visserij is bodemberoerend en ze doen dit en ze doen dat. Terwijl dat ze zelf duizenden tonnen stortsteen storten in de zee rond die windparken. En door de dynamiek die ontstaat van die windpaals, dat heb je net ook bij die presentatie gezien van professor Schrum, die bodemgesteldheid die verandert helemaal. Omdat er een mix is en een gigantische verstromingspatroon wat verandert. Ik spreek Engelse collega's, want wij vissen meestal aan de Engelse kant. Daar is een groot windpark gekomen, de Rampion Windfarm. En dan vraag ik aan hun, want zij mogen in dat windpark vissen, vang je nog wat? En die zeggen ook tegen mij, unaniem, ook de vissers van Ramsgate, waar de Tennet Windfarm staat, wij vangen niets meer. En al zouden wij daar, ze mogen de vissen zijn, maar ze vangen niets meer en de bodemgesteldheid die is zo veranderd door die stroming langs die turbinepalen dat ze er niet meer kunnen vissen. Hun vistuig raakt gewoon onder het zand. Dus al die gevolgen daarvan die zijn gewoon niet onderzocht. En wij als vissers, wij slepen een net, zoals de meeste van mijn collega's. Ja, moeten wij willen dat we in een windpark kunnen vissen, dat geeft zoveel schadeclaims natuurlijk aan. Dat kun je als sector niet aan. Dus wij worden gewoon verdreven uit ons gebied waar we normaliter altijd gevist hebben. En van de een op de andere dag hebben ze ons gewoon geweerd uit zo'n gebied. Als je voor de Belgische kust en je komt binnen een park wat aangegeven is door 4 boeien. En van de een op de andere dag, dan staat er nog geen windpolen, dan staat er nog geen paal. Dan krijg je gewoon een boete van €1400 als je die grens passeert. Dus er is zo'n enorme arrogantie. En iedereen, de visserman heeft gewoon het nakijken. En het klinkt misschien als een soort van Calimero verhaal, maar het is gewoon de realiteit zoals het ons overkomt op zee. Ja.
Thank you. And more questions? Please.
J'ai une question pour M. Ferreri. Si je vous ai bien compris, il y a toute une infiltration dans l'administration française du niveau communal jusqu'au gouvernement central. Est-ce que c'est un problème démocratique ou est-ce qu'il y a des conglomérats industriels ou d'autres puissances qui sont derrière? Quel est votre avis?
Si je peux me permettre, le terme infiltration me gêne un peu, il a un côté un peu complotiste sur lequel je ne veux pas me positionner. Il faut quand même savoir qu'il y a un organisme qui s'appelle le FIS franco-allemand, l'OFAT, je sais plus quel est l'acronyme, et qui est un organisme quand même très qui va vraiment dans le sens des promoteurs. Son bureau est installé en face de celui de notre ministre de l'Environnement, au sein même du ministère. Déjà, l'avocate qui défend le ministère dans le recours qu'on a lancé au Conseil d'État est une avocate qui vient d'un grand cabinet d'avocats qui est le cabinet d'avocats qui défend la filière éolienne. Vous voyez, tout ça, après, ça n'est pas interdit dans la législation, c'est juste des faisceaux concordants qui font qu'on a l'impression qu'en face de nous, les forces sont organisées par des gens qui sont très bienveillants à l'égard de l'éolien et tous les experts qui ont cherché à travailler dans ces commissions, qui ont été intégrés d'abord pour donner l'impression qu'effectivement il y avait un système pluraliste qui se mettait en place, ils ont fini par être exclus. Soit les commissions ont été fermées, les commissions de normalisation AFNOR notamment, on a abandonné leurs travaux et on a fini par le dernier protocole qui a été publié n'a été publié qu'avec les experts acousticiens et qu'avec les représentants de la filière éolienne. Les représentants des riverains et des acousticiens qui leur étaient bienveillants ont été écartés. C'est-à-dire qu'on on les a plus laissés travailler, donc ils sont partis d'eux-mêmes de toute façon. On a abandonné leurs travaux.
Donc, si j'ai bien compris, c'est que l'accès du citoyen est défavorisé pour l'instant, si je comprends bien.
Et vous savez, en toute logique, quand le ministère a publié les arrêtés, il devait les soumettre au public pour consultation. Alors ils ont été publiés sur Internet à des dates confidentielles, avec une information confidentielle. On a fini par savoir qu'ils étaient en consultation. Il y a eu, je ne me souviens plus exactement le nom, mais je vais vous donner un ordre d'idée. Il y a dû y avoir 500 contributions. Sur les 500 contributions, 498 motivées contre ces projets d'arrêté et ces nouveaux protocoles, 2 pour. Le ministère n'en a absolument pas tenu compte. Ça a été balayé dans les commissions ensuite qui les ont convalidé ces protocoles. On ne tient pas compte du public. Et juste, excusez-moi, juste pour finir, le ministère a publié les projets d'arrêté pour consultation publique, mais il n'a pas publié le protocole. On ne connaissait pas le protocole. Il a été imposé d'office ensuite.
Thank you. I'm Roos from Belgium, but I'm also the porte-parole of the petition, not against wind noise, the petition to the European Parliament. This petition has been put to your attention on April 2021. We are still nowhere, quasi. This is exactly the answer to your question. Nothing happens. And why? And this is really serious. And when these 2 gentlemen have requested that there is progress made, at least because it's there for 2 years vis-à-vis this petition, I think it's important, because the fact that there is no progress is the answer to all our questions. That very fact, the fact is partly with responsibility of the members of the parliament. We have to face it. We have to say it. This is your responsibility. We cannot do more than we do. Most of us are people who spend years of their life to bring to you the message that you have. We cannot do more.
Thank you very much. Please wear handphone. I speak Polish. Bardzo dziękuję. Tak naprawdę wszyscy mówimy tym samym językiem, mamy taką samą ocenę sytuacji. I może Państwu nie wypada, ale nam politykom, szczególnie ja, która w tym całym procederze przez kilka lat uczestniczyła w dużym kraju w środkowej Europie, mogę powiedzieć, że to nie tylko spiski, ale to są po prostu potężne pieniądze. Tu płaci każdy każdemu i bardzo często obywatel jest absolutnie bezbronny, nie posiada takiego lobby, nie posiada takich pieniędzy. To się dzieje na poziomie zawierania umów, które najczęściej trzymane są w tajemnicy, nie wolno ich ujawniać, z poszczególnymi rolnikami. To się dzieje na poziomie gminy, czyli jakichś samorządowców, którzy później wpływają, głosują nad decyzjami. To się dzieje na poziomie konsultacji czy też decyzji różnych agencji środowiskowych. Płaci się absolutnie potężne pieniądze za absurdalne opinie. Właściwie każdy może taką opinię napisać, która jest akceptowana w tym procesie konsultacji społecznych. To się dzieje na poziomie ministerstw, to się dzieje na poziomie Komisji Europejskiej. Ja mam odwagę o tym mówić, bo ja też byłam obiektem prób takiego przekonywania, żebym przestała się tym zajmować w Polsce. W związku z tym ma Pan rację, to leży po stronie Parlamentu Europejskiego, ale Parlament Europejski ma taką, a nie inną większość. Oni chcą jeszcze mocniej i jeszcze intensywniej, stąd te pomysły, one są już w przepisach, żeby energia odnawialna była inwestycją celu publicznego, gdzie nie będzie potrzeba konsultacji społecznej. Udało się uratować zapis, że w ogóle elektrownie wiatrowe są zdrowe. Taki był zapis w przepisach. ale wydaje mi się, że na pewno po spotkaniu z Państwem siądziemy z Panem Przewodniczącym, którym naprawdę bardzo dziękuję, jestem wdzięczna, bo problem właściwie nie znika, ale będzie eskalował. Że być może jeszcze uda się do końca kadencji przejąć, czy jakby rozpocząć tak zwaną Europejską Inicjatywę Obywatelską. My musimy zebrać 1 milion podpisów w Unii Europejskiej. Myślę, że to nie jest problem, bo tyle osób tym problemem jest jednak dotkniętych. Po to, żeby było to już i ustalimy pewnie z Państwem, ja się nie chcę wtrącać, bo nie jestem tutaj gospodarzem, to gospodarz będzie decydował, ale wydaje mi się, że jesteśmy już na etapie, że musimy podjąć taką próbę, gdzie po pierwsze doprowadzimy już do takiej szerokiej debaty na poziomie Komisji Europejskiej, Parlamentu Europejskiego i zmusimy Agencję Środowiska, żeby przestała lekceważyć petycję. Ja pamiętam Pana petycję, bo ja bywam na tych spotkaniach, kiedy w Komisji Petycji coś dotyka energii odnawialnej. No mamy mało czasu, dlatego że od kwietnia właściwie przestajemy funkcjonować, bo już się zaczynają wybory, ale być może właśnie w tym wyborczym momencie uda się wzbudzić takie emocje, które uzmysłowią Europejczykom, że to nie jest zabawa, że to jest jednak duża dyskryminacja własności, ale również brak szacunku dla natury pod hasłami ochrony środowiska. Ja bardzo dziękuję. Po raz kolejny wiem jeszcze więcej. Deklaruję tutaj pełną współpracę i pracę na rzecz tej inicjatywy europejskiej. Dziękuję bardzo.
So then we go to the next part, that is the finances. So now we're going to look at the numbers. And our first speaker is economy writer and journalist Colin Bowman. Great experience of the wind energy industry and its procedures. She has been revealing the economy behind several of wind energy projects. She has been following the wind industry for decades. Already in 2009, she published the book, The Wind Power Scam, a story how the wind energy were about to fool a whole village in northern Sweden. So,
thank you for that introduction, and thank you very much giving me the opportunity to show my experience from this industry. Next slide, please. That's me. Next slide, please. I'm now going to take you on a journey to the rural area of Sweden. That's far from the nice offices here in Brussels and from the nice desktops where you create all the ideas that you are going to apply on us on the local level. This is Kaxås in Jämtland. I would like you, it's situated between Åre and Östersund, and I would like you to pay attention to the hills in front of the snowy mountains. This is where I live. I live in a village in the end of the lake, but this is where the wind power industry for over a decade, different wind industries has been attacking us with the suggestions of building wind turbines that are almost today 300 meters of height, and they would like them to place them on hills that are around 400, 500, 600 meters. So we are talking 1 kilometer up in the air. Next slide, please. So for over 14 years, we together in the village and in the area around, we have been defended our area and our beautiful view from the destruction from wind turbines. And so far we have succeeded. But I will give you an example how it works and the conflicts of interest that comes along with this industry. In 2019, officials and politicians in our municipality, Krokoms kommun, they wanted to close down our village school. What I didn't know then, but what I know today, is that this is often how it starts when they introduce the wind power industry. You don't know anything about it, but they close down your local school, because that's the strategy. They want to get rid of the people in the area. They want it to make it impossible to live there. And I've seen the pattern now after in other places. But thanks to the social entrepreneur Don Olofsson and his family, we decided that we want to save the school. We want young people to come into us and live in our village and the villages around, and take part of this beautiful nature that we have. So we started a project Kaxås, focusing on attracting young families from different parts of Europe and Sweden and the urban areas. Next slide, please. And so we did, and so we succeeded. We built 29 new nice houses with a beautiful view over the mountains and the lakes around the village. And we have attracted many families. We went from 100 residents to almost triple it to 300 residents in 4 years. I think that's very good. So there is a huge attraction for the living in the rural area in Sweden today. And we also succeeded to bring families to empty houses, 18 empty houses in the surroundings around the village, which before, it was houses that before the project were abandoned. Next picture, please. So this kids you see here are some of our new settlers, and they are going to go to the school in the future, and the school is safe for many years in the forward. But the thing is, the families that moved to us, they had made the biggest decision of their life. It's not easy to move people. And they are brave people. They have decided to move from friends and relatives, thousands of kilometers away from where they started their lives. So it's a very brave decision they made. And when we started this project, and we have been running it for 2 years, what we didn't know was at the same time, as an official at the authority in the municipality, was we needed their approval to build the houses, of course. So we applied for that, and we discussed with them and had a long dialogue. And we got approval for our plan, building the houses, and we attracted families. But the same person negotiated with Vattenfall to build the largest land-based wind industry in Sweden right around our whole residential area, both the new one and the old one, on the heights you saw in the first picture. And it was only by a coincidence we got to know, even though we had had this dialogue for a long time with the municipalities, authorities and officials. So what happened was that we got this news from a landowner, a private one. Of course he was not living in Jämtland, he lived in Stockholm, and he inherited the land. So we saw, oh wow, I can make some money of my older generation's land that I still own in Jämtland, and we'll get the wind power there. So we got this news by him. And when you get that news, and you have attracted so many families that had made a life decision, it's very difficult for you. Now we can talk about sleepless nights. We can talk about stolen lives. And we have made a great investment in those young families that way to come to the village. And none of them, because we had to ask them, we didn't know, do you like wind power? Do you want to have wind turbines here? But no one wanted to have any wind turbines in the area. So their expectation of coming to us, to our rural area, was of course the untouched nature, the wonderful views, the quietness, the wildlife, the skiing, and of course we are a great community with a lot of fun socially as well. And this is what happens when you are confronted with wind power. The value of the houses decreases 30% right away. It's not a decision taken that is going to be wind power. But from the start, when they started discussion, the value of the real estate decreases 30%. And that means that you can't get any loans, so you can't buy anything, you can't build anything. And what we needed to do in that situation we was in was that we had to make special agreements to those families so they would not suffer any financially damage due to this threat of wind power that came over us. And what we now know is where the wind turbines, where they move in, people move out. Next picture. And more things happens. If you even dare to oppose to this industry and its political patrons, you will pay a very, very high price for your resistance, and you will risk a lot of your life. You will get harassed, you may lose your job, and you will be exposed to a lot of hatred. The methods that are used by the industry and politicians is not democratic. You shouldn't treat your citizens this way. But this is a method because they want you to be quiet and they want to get you out of the community. And you have to be very brave and resilient to be able to stand up against this multi-industry with all this money. Next slide, please. And the things that is happening in Sweden right now is due to the massive spread of wind turbines in our rural areas all around the land. We are facing a complete destruction of our nature. Turbines affect the wildlife, we have heard it here, the bird life, we have heard it here, insects, and the biodiversity. Untouched views are lost forever. Forest transforms into stone deserts. And we can talk about thousands and thousands of hectares of forests that are completely destroyed and devastated. And unspoiled views, like you see here, when you can see and there's no wind power, it's become so rare due to this massive expansion of the wind industry. So the question is now raising whether we must be classified as a World Heritage Sites for future generations to come. Next slide, please. If the devastation continues for future generations, they will not be given the opportunity to understand the interaction between nature, animal life, and man, which is crucial for our existence on this planet. So next, the last slide. So summary, this is what I urge based on my experience, and that is we need to do more unbiased scientific studies, and we need to do analysis on the consequences, and they needs to be done immediately. We need to put an end and stop right now to offshore and onshore wind power. And those residents, and there are many of them both in France and in Sweden, that are strongly affected financially by the industry, they must be compensated for the damage caused by the wind power industry so they can find a new life elsewhere. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Doreen. The next speaker is Dr. John Constable, PhD, Cambridge University, Director of the Renewable Energy Foundation. John Constable is a one-time academic who now directs the Renewable Energy Foundation, a UK charity publishing a wide range of data and analysis on the energy sector. And I think he's online. Yeah? You have the floor.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. I've been asked to speak about the economics of wind installations, and my remarks are based on work that's been published at the Renewable Energy Foundation over the last decade, which is thoroughly empirical. However, I will start with some theoretical remarks, because these underpin the empirical results. We can see empirically that wind is very expensive, but it's interesting to understand why that is the case, and we can see it quite straightforwardly with a theoretical perspective. Professor Bergkamp touched on the issue that wind is often regarded as free. Well, in fact, while true, so is the oil and the coal and the gas and the uranium in the ground. But there is an extraction, a conversion, and a delivery cost for all these fuels: wind, oil, coal, and gas. It happens, empirically, we know it's true, that the extraction, conversion, and delivery costs for wind are extremely high per kilowatt hour as compared to conventional energy. And therefore the question arises, why is that so? Well, theory tells us quite clearly why that is so. It is the physical quality of wind energy that is the problem. The thermodynamic quality, in fact, of the energy state. This is very poor quality energy. It's very close to random heat. But the energy required by consumers as electricity is of a very high quality, very low entropy, whereas the wind is of very high entropy, it's chaotic. Clearly, a great deal of correction takes place between these two states, the poor quality of the wind as found in nature and the electricity that is supplied by consumers. And that is the clue to its cost. It's resource intensive. A great deal of correction is taking place to the wind. Indeed, you can regard much of the high quality that is delivered to consumers as actually supplied by the corrective mechanisms between these two states. And this is experienced by consumers as extremely high cost. To illustrate the poor quality of the wind, I will indicate only one fact about it. I'm not sure I'm the first person to publish this, but I have not heard it from others. There are no living organisms, absolutely none whatsoever, that derive their fundamental metabolic energy from wind. The organisms, of course, coast on wind, and plants use wind to disperse their seeds and pollen. But they do not derive their fundamental metabolic energy from wind. There is no way of making a living from wind. But nature is remarkable at finding a means of survival for living organisms. So this absence of life of wind is quite remarkable. Of course, there are living organisms that derive their fundamental metabolic energy from some plants, but I note that they themselves are rather simple and do not move or have complex civilizations to support. So much for theory. We can now see that there is a theoretical problem with wind, and indeed with sun, but that's a secondary issue here today. There's a fundamental problem with wind in theory. Empirically, we see extremely high capex, extremely high opex, and very high system costs in delivering the energy generated to consumers. Of course, the industry itself claims to have reduced its capex and opex, but empirical study of audited financial statements in Europe tells a quite different story. And you can find the results of this work in peer-reviewed papers in the literature and in major studies published by my own organization, Renewable Energy Foundation. We do not see significant reductions in capex, and we actually see OPEX, operational costs, maintenance costs, rising. System costs are extremely high. In the early 2000s in the UK, before we had much wind or sun, system costs, balancing costs that is, were around about £400 million per year. Last year, they were approximately £4,000 million, £4 billion. I can't say that all that increase, that staggering increase, is the result of wind and sun, but a very large part of it is. When you introduce stochastic generation, random generation, into a system, inevitably the costs are going to increase for the physical reason I've just indicated. The entropy of the wind flow is very high. The service required by consumers of electricity is a low entropy, it's very ordered, high quality, and therefore much correction must take place between these two states. And that's resource intensive, and that manifests itself as very high costs to consumers. Well, you may say, well, why on earth do people build wind turbines in the first place? Well, the answer, of course, is that they're heavily subsidised. And the subsidy comes in many different forms. Direct income support to investors, so that they get a return on capital, and these are very expensive devices, and as I say, the capex does not fall significantly. The aggregate costs of subsidies to European consumers are of a considerable magnitude. I calculated from European Union data that between 2008 and 2021, the renewables industry, much of which was wind, had received somewhere in the region of 770 billion euros in income support from consumers and taxpayers. And these are very large sums of money. And that is rising at roughly some 60 billion euros a year. But there are many other subsidies to the industries, for example, avoided grid connection costs, and in fact that they don't pay for the integration costs, the system costs that £4 billion a year in the UK alone, that they are imposing on the electricity system. So there are very high costs to consumers here. But it goes beyond this, and we must think about this in terms of climate policy. Is this actually a sustainable or an economically compelling climate policy? And these extremely high costs, which as I say have physical groundings, manifest themselves in climate policy as a very high abatement cost. That is the cost of reducing a ton of carbon dioxide. Well, that cost turns out on examination to be very high in relation to an estimate of the harm caused by that ton of carbon dioxide, that is the social cost of carbon. Estimates of social cost of carbon vary considerably, but central estimates are around about $50 to $100 a ton. The US Environmental Protection Agency is currently arguing for what I think is a very high cost, about $190 a ton. But even at that very high US EPA cost, the abatement cost from renewables, and particularly offshore wind in Europe, particularly floating offshore wind, is going to be several times that. It's going to be very, very high. In other words, the cure being offered is actually worse than the disease, and therefore this is not an economically rational climate policy, and that's very important indeed. I mean, it's rational to have a climate policy. There's no doubt about that. But your climate policy must be rational, and ours simply isn't. In economic terms, it is quite clear that the cure is actually worse than the disease. People intuit this in various different ways. I might just display it to you in a technical fashion, but the man and woman in the street pick these things up in more general and intuitive terms, but they're not wrong to do so. We think about complex issues in all sorts of ways. And there will be pushback against this. People can see that this is not actually an environmentally wise or sustainable policy. So the conclusion is that for physical reasons, which we can see in theory, and empirical reasons, which we can see in fact from economic performance, the wind industry has been dramatically over-deployed. This is a niche technology, which might make sense for remote locations with batteries. It will never be cheap energy, but it might be the cheapest in a particular location. This is a niche technology which has been grotesquely overblown to the detriment both of consumers and indeed of the climate policy which it claims to support. However, the good news is that markets work, and these facts are increasingly known in the financial centres of the world. And there are organisations and institutions who are preparing shorting strategies on this industry. There's a huge market opportunity here to short the wind industry and to exercise market hygiene. I would prefer that this does not actually happen and that governments wind this down before much more capital is now invested in this sector. We need to do this for the consumer interest and also in order to preserve and redesign our climate policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John Constable. Next speaker is Professor Jan Lundgren, that has a career as encompassed all aspects of nuclear technology, starting in research and education at a university, moving on to nuclear strategy and policy management in the corporate world, as well as business training for all levels of management, present position is targeting top-level nuclear business management. He's an internationally recognized speaker, trainer, and advisor to companies, governments, and international organizations on nuclear business issues. He's author of the book Everything You Need to Know About Sweden's Electricity Supply. You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, John Constable, for stealing all my talk. I can essentially underline everything that has been said, and I'm going to present you a few examples taken on top of my head. The title of this day is Wind Industry at What Cost? And I'm going to provide the answer, high and rising. We have spent enormous amounts of tax money in Europe to make all electricity generation unprofitable. The reason is that we have made ourselves dependent on production which we cannot control. When the wind blows, we get both anorectic and bulimic situation. When the wind does not blow, we have anorexia, we don't get the energy we need to our system. And then when the wind blows a lot, then we get bulimic, we get more than we can handle. And from the point of view of the poor electric grid, both are very difficult to handle. And for the financial system, it means that suppose that you have favorable wind conditions, say 1/3 of the time or a quarter of the time, something like that. Let's make it 30% just to make it easy. That means that all the other ways of producing electricity, we need electricity 24/7. That means they lose income during 1/3 of their time. You can handle that if you have an old facility which was built back in time, you have paid off the investment, and now you just have operational costs to cover. But that's not sufficient to build new plants that operate 24/7, the type of energy which is dispatchable, that you control, that you get electricity when you need it. So now we have run ourselves into the situation that thanks to the enormous spending of tax money, we have got a wind industry that doesn't make profit, and it erodes the possibility for every other way of producing electricity to cover the cost to build new plants. We can continue operating old plants, but we can't get finances in building new plants in this situation. And therefore, I voted yes to join the European Union some 25 years ago, because at that time the European Union was pro-market economy. I doubt that today. What we've seen now is that we have come into a situation where we made all the electricity generation in Europe a communist activity. Everything has been made unprofitable thanks to spending lots of tax money. And now we're in the situation that we need to spend more and more tax money to compensate for the tax money we've already thrown in there. We're burning money, so the costs are high and they are rising. But that's only on the generation side. However, I spent a year of my life due to COVID. I lost all my clients during COVID because I couldn't travel. So I wrote a book about the power grids in Sweden, and I figured out this essentially the same all over Europe. The generation side is only half the story. You often hear the phrase, "Oh, we need all electricity." That's a deeply anti-intellectual statement, because all ways of creating electricity are not equal, and they affect the power grid, the system, in different ways. Electricity is a highly integrated system. You can actually argue that all the electricity generation and all the users and all the power lines in between, they are actually just one big machine. Everything goes together, and everything affects each other. I'm going to be a little bit technical here. In large-scale, heavy generation, that means fossil plants, nuclear plants, large-scale hydropower plants, you have so-called synchronous generators. In Sweden, if something is incomprehensible, we say, "That sounds like Greek to me." Sorry, all my Greek friends. But the word synchronous is actually Greek. Syn means at the same, and chronos, time. That means generators that produce the 50 hertz of frequency which we use in our electricity grid and all over Europe. That is, they have generators that stabilize the production. You can steer that you get exactly the revolutions 50 per second that you need to keep everything under control. If you go 1% off that value, you close down the entire continent because you can't operate it. So these large heavy installations, they are essential for the steering and control and thereby for the stability of the power supply to the entire continent. What has happened the last 20 years is that we have closed down lots of synchronous generation and replaced with asynchronous generation. Is also Greek and means not. So that means the generators you have in wind farms, and even worse in solar systems, they work completely different. But anyway, in wind farms, you have generators that cannot be used to steer and control what you're producing. You get what you get. The generators in those, they act like this. Okay, the generation today is 49.98. Well, then I also run 49.98. They follow what's happening in the system, but you can't use them to stabilize. You can't use them to steer the system back in case you are off the target value for everything. And that means when you get changes in the wind, you get disturbances of the entire system. And if you don't have these heavy elephants on a skewer rotating all the time in fossil plants, in nuclear and large-scale hydro, you start to get much more fluctuations in your power system. And now we come to exactly what John Constable mentioned, that costs money. I can just give you a quick number. In Sweden, we have gone from 1 to 20 billion Swedish kronor, that's about 2 billion euro, over a 5-year period, just for compensation of the disturbances that has been produced in our power system. And that is essentially all of it due to wind power. We're now to such an extent that the cost just for stabilizing the lack of stability produced by wind power in other parts of the system, which you don't see on your normal electric bill, in 4 years you can build a new nuclear power plant of that, which would produce as much as the entire wind fleet, more or less. So we're coming into a situation where we spend enormous amounts of, that is, tax money to compensate for the problems created in the wind industry. At the same time, we have made the same study as Constable referred to on Swedish grounds. 85% of all the wind companies, operational companies, they make loss. The average loss is 15%. That means in 6 or 7 years you erode the entire capital of the company. Of the 15%, I'm not saying they make loss. They don't make, well, we have 15% that don't make loss. I don't say they make profit. They don't make loss. They make so small profit that not a single one of the wind companies in Sweden pays dividends to their shareholders. And that's the whole purpose of a limited liability company, not a single one of them. So what this is really about is an activity financed by tax money. And we have realized that one important source of income for these companies is green subsidies from the European Union. What happens is that you can get a bank loan for very low interest rate if you can put a green flag on your project. It turns out that essentially all wind power in Sweden is owned from elsewhere. China is the largest owner. The single largest owner is the Chinese state-owned nuclear power company CGN, and you can start to think why on earth they should run wind power in Sweden. Secondly, we have Switzerland and Luxembourg. So it's not Swedish companies, it's international companies. They start a subsidiary in Sweden, which they can let go bankrupt when it's time to clean up the mess in a few years. They get green subsidies from Brussels at extremely low interest rates because it's a green project and it will save the world. The Swedish company is operated at zero profit or somewhat loss. That Swedish company, they now have to loan money from the mother company in Luxembourg to an interest rate which is 4 or 5 times higher than the interest rate the mother company in Luxembourg gets from Brussels. And that means this is a way of greenwashing subsidies. This entire thing makes people with terribly expensive suits in London and similar places very happy, so they can throw champagne on each other. This is what happens with, if you can misuse a system, people will misuse the system, and that's exactly what we've seen. Okay, but let me then summarize. Now we're talking about all these various different aspects, but please let us take one step back and think a little bit. We have had a medical doctor giving a presentation. We have seen pictures of the human respiratory system. Suppose that you are in charge of a hospital. You have patients that have difficulties breathing. It's your job to buy a machine that helps human beings breathing so they don't die. You have 2 different technologies to choose from. One in which sometimes you don't get any air at all. Sometimes you get far more oxygen than the patient can handle. You cannot control it. It changes, it fluctuates violently. Or you can go for a system that works 24/7, gives the right amount of oxygen to the patient every second in the day, and you control how much should be given. Pick your choice. And then remember that electricity, that is what keeps poverty away. That is the basis for a high civilization with high quality of living. Electricity is the oxygen of civilization. And I turn to the European policymakers. Make relevant choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Blomgren. Is there anyone who have any questions?
My name is Samuel Young. I'm the assistant to Mr. Roos, and I have a question to Professor Blomgren. Because when discussing the costs of wind energy with proponents of it, they always claim that the costs of wind energy are decreasing rapidly and that the profits are actually going up quite rapidly because of innovation. Why is this untrue, and what would you say to those proponents of wind energy?
Well, the reason it's untrue is that it's based on expectations. Another way of saying is that it's based on wishful thinking. I see exactly the same thing in my home turf, that they say that, well, in a few years we will have this cost and so on. But when John Constable in the UK and people I know in Sweden actually go in and look at the audited numbers from the operators, they are read all of them. So that's simply a lie. Secondly, what they talk about is only the actual production cost of the electricity without looking into its intrinsic value. That is, they don't look into the costs that are produced elsewhere by eroding the power grid in other places, but they're also not looking into what is the financial value when you get it. When you have lots of wind, it means that you have an excess of it. It means that the value is very low. That's not taken into account in their calculations. And it's not taken into account how expensive it is to produce something else when it's not blowing. So it's really, well, it's okay to make arguments that support your position, but this is taken to the limit, I would say, or rather beyond.
Thomas?
Yeah, my name is Thomas Brandberg. I work as a political advisor in the Swedish Parliament. I have political question. Is it okay to take it now, or should we wait? Okay. Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for organizing this seminar, and I think something that I noticed that we have people coming from different countries in Europe, and they are experiencing not exactly the same problems, but similar problems. And we discover here today, we discovered that we have many of these problems in common. But now I have a question to the organizers. Like, at the same time, I have discovered that there's a very solid support, very solid political support for renewable energy in this very building. So, do you see any possibility at all to like block this development towards even more renewable electricity production? How would you comment on that? Thank you very much.
I would say for the moment, no. But after next election, if people start to be waking up and see the reality, maybe.
Yeah, if people vote correctly, but yeah, that's utopia.
Well, let's be clear. We spoke about money. This is about 40 to 50,000 billion dollars, and that's a 40 and 50 with 12 zeros, and that is a figure from Goldman Sachs. So it's really about huge amount of money. And also Professor Bergkamp, he spoke about degrowth. This is exactly what the globalist left want us to do, degrowth. So what I see, this is a devil's pact between big corporate and the globalist left. The one gets the money, the other one gets the power. And if you step back and look from a distance, how did this started? We wanted to save the Great Barrier Reef. Do you remember? We wanted to save the Great Barrier Reef. And now the Great Barrier Reef is doing perfect. That was last year in the news. And in the meantime, we are destroying the seas in the rest of the world. But so it's just about common sense. And today we have heard all the things that it's so obvious, it's so clear that wind power, wind industry is not so renewable at all. And well, there was a nice phrase, but they all say the scientists agree, but if you silence the one who disagree, yeah, then that's what's happening now. The next mandate, I hope there will be more common sense. We see now in Germany, especially in Germany, that there is a deindustrialization going on. Big companies like BASF are moving away. They are leaving Germany. It's just not doable anymore. The cost of energy is too high. They cannot compete with other parts of the world, and also the regulations. It's especially for small businesses. I think it's devastating what's going on right now. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I feel the consequences every day. So it was already said, people will not accept it anymore, but still people are still quiet, and I think we should speak more out loud, and that's why it's so important that we have events like this where we can look from all kinds of perspectives, from fishermen to ecologists, from the economy, and that we show the people that there is also a different view. I'm for 30 years in energy, for 30 years, and I speak out since the beginning of this mandate. They called me climate denier. You're not allowed to speak, you're a climate denier. I know what I'm talking about, but you just, and these are people, they did a social study, they even kids, young people from the Greens, and they did a social study, but they are telling us how to live. They are telling the fishermen how to work at sea. They do it for generations. They tell the farmers how to farm. These people were growing up in cities. They did a study, and they grew up in cities, and they still live in cities, and they are telling farmers and fishermen, etc., how to live. So I think common sense must come back. I hope also next mandate that it will come, and then I give the floor back to you.
A very small comment, actually. I will repeat what I just said. Today I discovered how much we have in common. So let's everybody stay in contact.
Is there any other questions?
I just wanted to add to what you said here. I think the biggest problem we have today is that decision is made here. It should be made and stated on a local level by the people that are affected by it. We have built a system, like you said, a communist system, where we have no longer democracy out in the lands, and that's the biggest problem. So if we could move this decision from the green young people here running around making their creative ideas that is not working, to move that decision to the local people, and then we will get very good decisions, common sense, if we move the decisions to where it belongs. Thank you.
Well, one more question.
It is not a question, it's a statement. There are, in Europe, about 70% of the people live in cities, and the rest live outside of cities. 70% of people, that's 70% of the voters. How do you explain to the people in the cities that they should have that sort of common sense? I do not know.
For the Swedish part, I can tell you that over 50% of the population in Sweden is living in rural area or small cities or small.
Good for Sweden.
So more than a majority of the people are affected by the wind power from that perspective.
But that's not the case in, let's say, Central Europe.
Can I just
Very sure.
Just to make a good point, that's kind of why the point about decentralization becomes even bigger, because, like I said, urban people probably shouldn't decide that you put wind powers in rural areas and vice versa. So the point is that if you move the decision making to a more local level, then you can actually take decisions that the local residents would be proud of. And there are some situations where local could be more acceptable towards wind power, for example. So it's not impossible, but then you need to move the decision-making process to the local authorities.
Good luck.
Well, that's the principle of subsidiarity. That's what they always talk about, but they don't do that. We see we had a nice view from all perspectives today here in what's going on in Europe, but also at the other end of the ocean they have the same problems. The increase in whale and dolphins death of the East Coast in the United States since 2016 is not due to the construction of large industry wind turbines, say the US government officials. Their scientists have done the research, they say. They prove that whatever is killing these whales is completely unrelated to the wind industry. And here you go, it's their scientists, and of course, and that's the phrase that I was searching, all scientists agree when you censor the ones who don't. But now, a new documentary, Thrown to the Wind, by director and producer Johan Markowicz, argues that the US government officials have been lying. And it shows that the wind industry is correlated directly with specific whale deaths. Michael Schellenberger is the executive producer, and let's watch a brief extract of the trailer. Thank you so much.
I saw another whale that washed up. It's becoming a pattern. Is it the windmills? Is it the pounding of the seafloor? How many whales is it going to take?
There aren't many places where the North Atlantic right whale can go. It's destined to extinction.
It sounds like they're going to a pile drive.
Well, the United United States is looking at is thousands of wind turbines in an area that our whales, our dolphins, our marine life, where they live, where they migrate, where they breed. It's only when they started going into the wind lease areas that we believe that the whales are dying.
So those red dots are whale deaths.
Precisely.
What a scandal.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you. I'm very happy to hear that folks in the European Parliament are rethinking wind energy. This is something that we have been doing a lot of work on in the United States. Thank you to the member of the European Parliament, Mr. Nissinen, Johan Nissinen, for inviting my commentary. I would love to give you some hopeful news, some encouragement. We're not obviously completely there yet, but there's been some very important progress lately in the United States in terms of exposing the environmental consequences and the economic costs of wind energy. We've been involved in exposing the role of the wind industry on the east coast of the United States in causing an increase in whale deaths due to the high decibel sonar, which is in violation of US laws, and has been done to map the ocean floor, as well as the impact of increased boat traffic, which has resulted in more whales dying, a significant increase, as well as a cover-up by the government agencies that are supposed to be monitoring this. We have two very strong pieces of science. There will be congressional hearings in the United States this fall. And all this is coming at a time when the wind industry is obviously suffering significantly because its own costs are so high. Wind energy is a highly inefficient form of energy. It requires somewhere between 1 to 2/3 of its total cost to be subsidized. The United States has put a huge amount of money into wind energy for over 30 years, and it still requires more and more subsidies, proving the underlying inefficiency of the technology. The problem with wind, like all renewables, is that they're energy dilute, and so you have to spread wind collectors over a very large area. We've saturated most of the land areas of the United States, and that's why there's this big push to go offshore. If I could say a couple of hopeful words, encouraging words to all of you that are challenging the orthodoxy on wind energy in Europe, I would encourage you to also look into the environmental impacts. I think sometimes people emphasize the economic inefficiencies of wind energy, but the environmental impacts are just as serious, and I think they're more heartfelt by people when you see dead whales, you see the dead birds, the raptors, in Germany, I know there's been a number of lawsuits that have blocked wind energy production. I believe that's probably the case across Europe. And I think it's very important because I think people, quite understandably, want to spend more money on energy if we think it's going to protect the environment. If the energy is not going to protect the environment and have a negative impact on the environment, then I think people don't want to support it. So I think that the environmental issue is very important. And that if you just emphasize the economic issue, I think people might get the wrong impression that you don't care about the environment, or that you don't think it's worth spending money to save the environment. And I think most people do, and rightly so. We want to save wildlife and other endangered species. Around the world, people want to do this. Nations are committed to this with good reason. And so we should, I think, embrace and have a new vision of conservation that emphasizes natural gas and nuclear in particular. And the reason for that is that they're energy dense, they are comparatively cheap, and they're also cleaner. They're decarbonizing, they reduce air pollution. A lot of fears about nuclear that are unmerited. I've given so many talks on it that people will have to look on YouTube to find those. And you can also see why renewables can't save the planet, which is a TEDx talk I gave. It actually has more views now than my nuclear talks. So, thank you for your work in raising serious questions about the expansion of wind energy in Europe. And I encourage you, I think, keep in mind the economics of wind energy are terrible, and that we need to make the environmental case against wind, not just the economic case. I think if you combine those two things, And combined as well with a positive message for abundant natural gas and nuclear, which are both reduce carbon emissions and are the basis of civilization and a way to avoid environmental impacts on the landscapes, I think it's a winning strategy, and we should stick with it. And if we get our movements organized and energized, I think that's what will happen, and we will finally see an end to this atrociously inefficient and environmentally degrading technology. Thank you again for listening, and good luck to all of you, and please stay in touch on X, formerly Twitter, and on Substack. Please subscribe today, which is just public.substack.com, so you can get our regular communications and research reports. Thanks so much.
And I will give the closing to Madeleine Staff Kurda from Motvind Sverige.
Well, hello everybody. Yes, my name is Madeleine Staff Kurda, and I'm originally from Sweden, and I have been involved in the wind energy since 2014, when me and my neighbors one Sunday morning woke up with excavators and a construction team on our private property land. Yes, private property land. A project in Turkey, financed and erected by German entities. Despite court verdicts by the Turkish Supreme Court, we were not able to stop the intruders. And the reason is corruption. Financed and supported by the German government and green funds from Europe. And this is maybe the answer of many people's question today, why we are not being heard, why the scientists are not being able to do their work. So, therefore, can you all hear me? Yes. Therefore, I'm now very grateful to Mr. Johan Nissinen and Mr. Robert Roos for having the courage to organize this seminar. And I say courage because this is a part of the Green Deal and clearly an organized pattern of the big wind. With this collusion, with an establishment supported with tax money, feeding connivance and corruption, not only within the European Union, but also around the world, wherever they are operating. And this is a true crime to the environment, it is a true crime to the people, and it is a true crime to the next generations. So please hear me clearly, because no matter what you have been told, it is a fact that the wind energy doesn't deliver if there is no wind. It is a fact. And it also needs, as we have heard here today, a very expensive backup system working 24/7. So we need two systems as well. And it is a fact, we don't save the climate by destroying our nature. We don't become independent by building constructions of wind turbines all over our lands and in our forests and seas. And we don't become a decent law-abiding state by misusing citizens' tax money. So whatever the people who like or promote the wind energy with its politicians, that they say that we have a challenge. No, this is a problem due to bad political decisions, only favoring the multi-billion euro wind industry, financed by the union's hard-working people's tax money. And this has led to this chaotic situation we do have today with the energy in Europe. And it is a green bubble that is about to burst, and the wind is not renewable. It is not green. The wind is green and renewable, but the wind energy, the wind turbines are not. So, all decisions that regarding wind are made by politicians, believing they are doing something good, but living in a green bubble, and they have forgotten all the directives that the European Union has built up and adopted during decades. And with this wrong belief, destroying our environment, power system, welfare, and democracy. So they need to take off the green glasses. It needs to be removed, and with common sense, remember the aim of the European Union, that this is a well-being of its citizens, peace and freedom, security and justice, as well as combat crime. So with this said, I wish that you all take one step forward. To the politicians, I ask you to take your responsibility and correct what has gone wrong. And even if it's in the 11th hour, we need a moratorium to rethink and to do good again. And to the journalists, I ask you to look into the abuse of power and connivance in order to reveal the fraud of the European tax money and corruption of the green funds. And to the people, I ask you to remember all this when you vote next time, in your own country and at the European election in June next year. So finally, I want to thank everybody that has had the courage and strength to come here today, to all the speakers that we had heard online, and that everyone that is struggling locally, because we are many all over the world and all over Europe that are struggling against the wind industry. And we are not climate deniers, we are not stupid, we are ordinary people living outside in the nature, doing our good everyday work as you all are. And we are in Sweden, we are in Holland, we are in France, in Belgium, UK, Ireland, Greece. We are all over and we are being ignored. And we want our voice to be heard. So, because we are fighting for our health, for our private property, and for our human rights, and to achieve justice against the big, multi-billion euro big wind industry. So therefore, thank you, Mr. Nissinen, and thank you, Mr. Robert Roos, and the whole ECR group that has been behind this seminar today, to enable us to be heard here in Europe, in Brussels, in this parliament. We are writing history here today. Thank you for this. Thank you so much for this. We are thousands, maybe 100,000 of people all over that are so grateful for this day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marlene, for those nice words. And I will say thank you for all the participants and speakers and everyone who have been part of organizing this. You all have been very great. Thank you very much. And also, like Carola said in the beginning, now it's lunch for all the participants. So if Cornelia and Gustav wave a little bit, you see, when they will go out there, so go to them so we can follow. And those who not participate for the lunch.